Distinguished guests and speakers, chers collègues, chers amis, bonjour, bienvenue. On behalf of Massey College and the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights, I'm pleased to welcome you to this important gathering on the crisis in Sudan. My name is Payam Akakvan, and I serve as the Human Rights Chair at Massey College and as Canadian co-chair at the Wallenberg Centre. I'm honored to make some brief introductory remarks regarding the significance of this event, which addresses the world's worst humanitarian catastrophe. I will begin by acknowledging on behalf of Massey College that we are on the treaty land of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and home to many indigenous peoples, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis from across Turtle Island. We recognize the enduring presence and stewardship of indigenous people on this land and acknowledge our ongoing duty to share and care for it responsibly. On February 17th of this year, the UN fact-finding mission for Sudan issued a damning report. The title speaks for itself: Hallmarks of Genocide in El Fasher. This reflects the report's conclusion that, and I quote, the mass killings and related atrocities committed by the rapid support forces in and around El Fasher during its takeover of the city on or around 26 and 27 October 2025 are indicators of a genocidal path. These crimes followed an 18-month siege during which the rapid support forces deliberately imposed conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of non-Arab communities, in particular the Zaghawa and the Fur. There is here a grim sense of a horrible déjà vu. We have witnessed this nightmare before, and it began a long time ago. On March 31st of last year, we commemorated the 20th anniversary of the UN Security Council's referral of the situation in Darfur to the International Criminal Court. That was 2005, a generation ago. Some of us were hopeful then. In 2009, arrest warrants were issued against President Bashir, then a sitting head of state, for crimes against humanity and genocide. In October of last year, the Ali Kushaib trial concluded with a guilty verdict in The Hague. But a culture of impunity prevails for many others, and the shocking crimes continue. That we are still speaking of genocide in Darfur today is an indictment against the international community for its persistent failure to act. Once upon a time, there would at least be symbolic vows of never again. Now, there is nothing. Darfur is the forgotten genocide. Those of us who worked in the humanitarian field during the 1990s will remember the fallout from the Srebrenica and Rwanda genocides. We will recall all the talk about lessons learned, a shift to early warning and the prevention of genocide, the celebration of the responsibility to protect that Canada championed in the year 2000, followed by its adoption at the 2005 UN World Summit. Today, we live in a different reality, gripped by the resurgence of divisive ideologies and militarism, cynical power politics, and moral cowardice, a precipitous decline in the international rule of law, a diminishing of empathy and morality as weakness and naivete, oblivious that our world still remains as it was before, inextricably interdependent. We are gathered here today because there is no room for despair. We must do what we can, not least here in Canada, where we still claim to champion the humanitarian ideals of that historical period before what Prime Minister Carney has referred to as the rupture. We must navigate the world as it is, not as we wish it to be, as he said in Davos, but the world as it is, not as the world as it is the world as we have made it. It is a reflection of our choices. So we are here today to consider what choices Canada must make on the global stage to alleviate the plight of the long-suffering people of Darfur. I'm immensely grateful to Mutassim Ali, Senior Legal Advisor, and Yona Diamond, Senior Legal Counsel, both at the Wallenberg Centre, for their initiative. This event was their vision, and they have provided the substantive content of this program. They have worked diligently on Sudan for many years and authored highly significant reports, including a seminal analysis of the application of the Genocide Convention to the situation in Darfur. I'm also deeply grateful for the support of Irwin Cotler, the founder and international chair of the Wallenberg Centre, a dear friend and mentor of many years, whose indefatigable energy and resilience in the worst of times is an inspiration to many. I'm also indebted to the CEO, Gila Cotler, and to Kimberly Lenz and Brandon Golfman for their valued efforts in organizing this event. I'm especially pleased that Massey College could jointly host this event with the Wallenberg Centre at a time when so many exceptional champions of humanitarianism figure among its ranks. The principal, James Orbinski, from whom you will hear shortly, is a global moral authority whose heroic work with Médecins Sans Frontières in Rwanda, Sudan, and many other places throughout the world teaches us the meaning of leadership by example. Lieutenant Governor, the Honorable Romeo Dallaire, is yet another giant in the humanitarian universe who transformed the anguish of what he witnessed in Rwanda into an inspiring, lifelong campaign to humanize global politics. It is a great victory for the college that he has been appointed chair of Genocide Prevention and Peace. Nous sommes très fiers, chers collègues, que vous soyez parmi nous. And last but certainly not least, the Massey College visitor, Ambassador Bob Ray, Canada's outstanding former permanent representative at the UN, by all measures an extraordinary political leader, diplomat, and if I may say, much needed troublemaker. His long and distinguished record of global contributions to human rights is an inspiration. I'm also very grateful to my dear friends at the college, Jessica D. Humphreys, who has worked with General Dallaire for many years, and to Joe Costa and Sarah Baum for their valuable efforts in organizing this event. I now turn to the distinguished Canadian political leaders who have made the effort to be with us today. I gratefully recognize Faisal El-Khouri, Liberal Member of Parliament for Laval-Les-Îles in Quebec, who is chair of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs of the House of Commons. I also gratefully recognize Samir Zuberi, Liberal Member of Parliament for Pierrefonds Dollard, also in Quebec. Merci beaucoup de nous joindre. Votre présence est très appréciée. I also gratefully acknowledge Donna Dasco, Independent Senator for Ontario, who has also kindly joined us. We thank you for your solidarity and look to your leadership in ensuring Canada's greater engagement with the situation in Darfur. I will conclude by thanking the members of the Sudanese community who have joined us today and whose voices must be at the center of our deliberations. It is befitting that our distinguished MC for today is Motassem Ali, a Sudanese from Darfur, whose hometown El Fasher was raided by the Rapid Support Forces in October 2025. As I just mentioned, Motassem is Senior Legal Advisor at the Wallenberg Centre, who has played a key role in organizing this event. He is also a Doctor of Juridical Science candidate at the American University Washington College of Law. His research focuses on peacemaking and constitution making in post-conflict states. He is not just a brilliant mind, but also a truly thoughtful and conscientious human being. I thank you once again for being here today, and I'm proud to pass the baton to Motassem for the remainder of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Payam, for your kind introduction and for your leadership in facilitating this crucial event. Before we begin, someone forgot a phone somewhere outside. Just maybe you have too many phones and so you can't remember. Just with me here. Good afternoon and good evening to those who are watching from afar. It is my honor to guide us through today's program. We confront one of the most urgent moral and legal failures of our time. Atrocity prevention at the crossroads, Sudan and beyond, the ongoing atrocities in Sudan and the international community's failure to uphold the responsibility to protect. The Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights takes the most pressing struggles for justice and freedom and democracy around the world, founded by the Honorable Irwin Cotler, former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. We mobilize and engage a nonpartisan global coalition of parliamentarians, scholars, civil society groups, jurists, students, to take a collective stand for national justice and human rights. Anchored by Raoul Wallenberg's legacy, we work to protect individuals and groups persecuted by authoritarian regimes for their advocacy and civic engagement. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. We have a multi-faith chapel, I think, outside. The other side, one of our team will help you to access the facility. And as we engage in conversation, I ask that you silence your mobile devices. Feel free to walk in and out quietly. I think we have bathrooms on the other side. One of our team as well will help you. And as we engage in discussion, we ask that all remarks and questions be focused on Sudan and the plight of Sudanese. As we all know that the crisis in Sudan is too often abandoned. Today's event is not simply a gathering. It is an indictment, as Payam mentioned, an indictment of mass atrocities committed against Sudanese civilians, an indictment of the systematic failure of the responsibility to protect, a doctrine created precisely to prevent what is unfolding in Sudan today. We gather to honor the victims, to amplify the voices of survivors, and to confront the uncomfortable truth. The world knew, the world watched, and the world failed to act. The responsibility to protect was adopted in 2005 with a promise. Never again would the world stand by as a genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity unfolded. Yet in Sudan, early warning signs were ignored. Arms continue to flow to perpetrators, even as we speak. International institutions remain paralyzed. Civilians were left defenseless between armed actors who violated every principle of international law. The major question that I ask for today's event is, if the R2P or responsibility to protect cannot protect Sudanese civilians, then what left of the doctrine? Our speakers and panelists will enlighten us today. We'll answer this question among other questions. Now it is my privilege to introduce our first speaker, Professor Irwin Cotler. He's our international chair, an emeritus professor of law at McGill University, former Minister of Justice, an Attorney General of Canada, and a long-time Member of Parliament and an international human rights lawyer. As a Minister of Justice and Attorney General, Professor Cotler initiated the first ever comprehensive reform of the Supreme Court appointment process and helped make it the most gender representative Supreme Court in the world. Appointed the first ever Aboriginal and visible minority justices to the Ontario Court of Appeal. Initiated the first ever law on human trafficking, crafted the Civil Marriage Act, the first ever legislation to grant marriage equality to gays and lesbians, issued Canada's first national justice initiative against racism and hate, and most of all, he made the pursuit of international justice a government priority. As a leading parliamentarian on the global stage, he has been chair of the Interparliamentary Group for Human Rights in Iran, chair of the Interparliamentary Group of Justice for Sergei Magnitsky, chair of the All-Party Save Darfur Parliamentary Coalition, chair of Canadian section of the Parliamentarians for Global Action, and member of its International Council. Unfortunately, he could not be here with us in person, and so we have a recording for him. I hope the video works. Otherwise, we can just hear his message. Okay. Oh. Then we'll move to our next speaker. Then, Dr. James Urbanisky. He's a principal of Massey College, and also a professor at the University of Toronto. He is renowned. He's renowned for his groundbreaking research on medical humanitarianism, infectious diseases, global health governance, and the health impacts of climate change. Dr. Urbanisky's work is documented in its best-selling book, An Imperfect Offering, Humanitarianism in the 21st Century, as well as the award-winning documentary Triage, The Humanitarian Dilemma of Dr. James Urbanisky. The floor is yours. Please welcome.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome everyone to Massey College. This conference, workshop, is exactly the kind of issue that I, as principal of the college, very much value and want to use the college as a space to explore contemporary issues that are of the most significance in our world today. As has been briefly described, in my career, I've worked about 35 years in global health and mostly in humanitarianism, and mostly with Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, and most of that actually in the field. And I've worked in Peru, Brazil, Rwanda, Somalia, Afghanistan, Kosovo, Russia, many circumstances around the world. And I really have seen far too much of the blood-soaked human reality of suffering, political instability and crisis and war and genocide and of famine, epidemics and humanitarian crises that come with all of these. Payam said that there's no room for despair, but I think we have to also make sure that we make room for critical problem solving in today's world. Not, as Payam said, not as we wish it to be, but as it is. I'm just going to make a couple of brief comments and really emphasize a humanitarian practitioner's perspective. We know that Sudan is the world's most significant and greatest humanitarian crisis in the world today. 33 million, or 70%, of the population is food insecure. There is a second genocide in Darfur. The 1,000 days of civil war have left hundreds of thousands of people dead. The OCHA, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, has made an appeal of $2.6 billion, for $2.6 billion for humanitarian assistance to meet people's basic needs. Well, less than 15% of that call has actually come through. And it's extremely unlikely, given that more broadly, about 18% of all humanitarian appeals from OCHA and from, which is the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, globally only 18% of humanitarian needs are actually being funded. So it's extremely unlikely that more funding will be coming for humanitarian relief in Sudan, unless there's a concerted effort to make that happen. In my experience over many years, the genocide that I worked in Rwanda in 1994 is probably the most stark marker in my own personal life and personal career on what I describe as a humanitarian breadcrumb trail from the past to the present. And it's what I've learned is that that breadcrumb trail, it's not there before us. We create it, literally, by reaching into our pockets for a handful of breadcrumbs, throwing them in front of us, and taking the next step forward. It takes initiative, and it takes courage to do that. And I'm particularly delighted that on two fronts, we have here today at least two highly distinguished guests. One, of course, is Romeo Dallaire, who was force commander for UNAMIR, the UN force that was charged with dealing with an intractable situation in Rwanda and acting in the reality of a genocide despite the non-consent of the United Nations and its Security Council. I had the honor of working with General Dallaire during the genocide, and as Payam has said, I'm just thrilled that he's now a member of our college and chair of Genocide and Prevention Studies here at Massey College. The other highly distinguished member that we have, or person that we have here today, is Bob Ray. And on a very different level, but not by any means pacific, Bob has operated internationally as ambassador for Canada to the United Nations, and has also been a special envoy to several circumstances where crimes against humanity and possibly genocide have been or are taking place. And his courage in speaking into political space for justice, for fairness, and for the right resolution of terrible circumstances in Canadian history is truly unparalleled. And it is just such an honor now that Bob has joined the college and is our visitor to the college. And there are many others that are here that are participating and will participate in the discussion. I would just like to emphasize a couple of things. The breadcrumb trail that I talked about, it has an important history. And the origins of the notion of humanity as a legal constraint on the conduct of war, it's well-trodden ground. And throughout the ages, restraint in warfare has been informed by religious and ethical considerations, chivalry and class, and increasingly since the mid-19th century, since Henri Dunant founded the Red Cross, a body of customary and treaty law, variously referred to as the laws of war, the laws of armed conflict, or international humanitarian law. This has emerged, and in some significant way, and according to great scholars, these were and are an attempt to, quote, civilize or humanize war, not eradicate war. What we see is that even in the reality of the laws of war, international humanitarian law, the violations of those laws and those customs of warfare actually, if condemned, and if there is appropriate political action against such violations, they actually build the normative framework of international humanitarian law. And that takes courage. It also takes initiative. And so here we are today with that breadcrumb trail that I just very briefly described. Today it passes through, or has passed through, the humanitarian triumphalism, if you will, of the post-Cold War world, with the creation of the International Criminal Court, preceded by the International Criminal Tribunals for Rwanda and also for the former Yugoslavia, and also, as has been described, the creation of the imperfect, and I believe deeply imperfect, doctrine on the responsibility to protect. It also passes through the use of torture in the war on terror in Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay. It passes through the bombing of the UN compound in Iraq, the bombing of MSF hospitals in Afghanistan, the Russian carpet bombing of cities in Syria, and the reality of refugee boat people at sea seeking refuge in Europe, to whom the shores are truly all but closed. And that breadcrumb trail extends to egregious violations of the laws of war by Russia in its invasion of the Ukraine, and also in the Israel-Palestine war since October 7, and with the State of Israel now standing before the ICC on charges of genocide. And finally, it extends to the Israel-US bombing of Iran, where, for example, international humanitarian law has clearly been violated in at least one circumstance: the bombing of a school that left at least 150 children and others as collateral damage to their bombing campaign. And it now extends to the new political reality where the US Department of War, under Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, has effectively disbanded the US military's civilian protection oversight capacity. And it's not an overstatement to say that the US military is today the most powerful military in the history of the world, and it has walked away from international humanitarian law. This is truly, truly a dark moment on that breadcrumb trail. And so let me just come to the crux of what I would like to say. In that context as well, the United Nations and its multilateral system is more than fragmenting or more than eroding. It is exploding. And there are some who actually now question its relevance. The rules of war, as demonstrated in Sudan, as demonstrated in Ukraine, as demonstrated in the Middle East, as demonstrated in multiple other circumstances, the rules of war are broken. And the norms that held them up are also fraying. And so the reality is, we have to ask ourselves, are there rules anymore? Is humanitarian law and international law a dead man walking? That is not a question that I myself have posed, but it's certainly one that I am deeply gripped with. It's a question that has been posed by international law scholars and experts in The Hague. So what I would like to say is, just remember that image, the breadcrumb trail. It's not like we're following the trail, that somebody has gone before us. We're reaching into our pocket, we're throwing the breadcrumbs, and we're following the breadcrumbs. There is no humanitarian highway. It's never existed. Humanitarianism and the space in which it operates has always had to be created. And it's created by initiative, and it's created by courage. The initiative of individuals, the initiative of civil society organizations coming together who freely choose to associate and to act together to achieve an end. And it's achieved by the initiative, and the courage of those in political power to do what they know is the right thing to do and to do what they know must be done. And so I believe we're at a moment where deep initiative and deep courage are required in order to move forward along our humanitarian breadcrumb trail that we are literally making by our own initiative and by our own courage, both politically and within civil society. And when we think about that, and we think about the history that I very briefly just touched on, this is the history of humanitarianism across the ages. There are core moments where there are major markers of evolution. For example, Henri Dunant and the establishment of the Red Cross, for example, some of the other institutions that I talked about. These are really important, and they are moments of profound import. But in all cases, humanitarianism is a result of initiative and courage in the face of political turmoil or political choice. And so we are very much at a moment where we're back to the central importance of initiative and courage by individuals and by civil society organizations and by courageous politicians. And I think there's just a couple of points that I think are really important to emphasize. The very first and most important thing for humanitarian organizations is to act to relieve suffering where it is possible to do so. That's the number one and most important imperative of humanitarian actors. The second is to bear witness, to tell the world what we know, and to do so with the intent of pushing political actors, most especially nation states, to assume their responsibility. Civil society organizations cannot be and are not responsible for creating law. Our institutions, our governments, our states are responsible. And we've achieved a lot, but we are in a moment of regress. We have to hold on to what we have, and we have to push our politicians and our states to move forward to the extent that it's possible to do so. And number three, we always have to remain in solidarity with those people who are suffering truly egregious circumstances. And I don't want to go into too much detail on what is actually happening in Sudan. MSF itself has declared just a couple of days ago that it is at a humanitarian breaking point in Sudan. And that should tell you a lot about just what is actually happening. Again, as I said earlier, 33 million people are on the verge of starvation. This is 70% of the population. Sexual violence, rape as a weapon of war is replete, and so on. The other key point that I'd like to emphasize is that it's very important to build coalitions. Coalitions among civil society organizations, coalitions among states that are committed to the goals that are, at least to me, self-evident. And we have to push states to recognize that norms matter, and they only matter if they're enforced or if there are actions towards their enforcement. And then finally, and just very practically, we can ask states, our government here in Canada, to do a couple of things. Number one, recognize that genocide is taking place in Sudan. Number two, offer support for refugees, whether here in Canada or support for refugees who have moved outside of Sudan. And then number three, offer substantive humanitarian assistance. Make a substantive contribution to OCHA's call for funding for humanitarian assistance in Darfur. Let me close by saying that courage and initiative, these are required today more than ever before, certainly in Sudan. But what happens in Sudan will shape the face of humanitarianism around the world. So our courage, and your initiative, and your focused critical problem solving, these are really, really vital. And with that, I hope that our deliberations today are rich and fertile. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Urbanski, for your powerful and necessary insights. I now would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Ms. Halal Karib, Regional Director of SAIHA Network. Mr. Karib is a prominent Sudanese pro-democracy and human and women's rights defender with over 20 years of experience in Sudan, South Sudan, East Africa, I would say the Great Horn of Africa. She has worked extensively with international regional development and humanitarian institutions, focusing on women and girls in conflict and post-conflict areas, minorities, refugees, and displaced persons. As a regional director of the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa, SAIHA, Hala plays a pivotal role in promoting women's and girls' rights and empowerment in the region. She's also a well-respected voice in civil society and social and gender research, contributing regularly to international and national media outlets. Hala, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you to Massey College and to the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for the opportunity to speak about Sudan. I'd just like to remind everyone here that only 5 years ago, Sudan was a story of hope, and that Sudanese people have led a massive revolution against a long-term dictatorship of Omar al-Bashir, who controlled the country for over 30 years. And that 60% of those who participated in the protest in Sudan were women. We were all on the streets. We protested. We actively participated in the political change that has brought down the tyranny and the dictatorship. And we carried a lot of hope, assuming that this is going to be a turning point in the history of our country. Unfortunately, or sadly, Sudan is located in a region that the interest in democracy and the interest in democratic transformation is very minimal. So, that has led largely, in my view, in addition to the complexity of the situation inside our country and the volatility that surrounded our transition to this current situation we are in. It has been over 1,000 days since this war has started. 1,000 days. Every day, this war continues. It destroys our lives and brutalized the bodies of Sudanese civilians, particularly the bodies of women, girls, and children, and people with disabilities, the most vulnerable people. I'm very sure most of you have seen Human Rights Watch latest report speaking about how people with disabilities are struggling in this war. Since the beginning of the war, I can't recall a day without at least 4 cases or 5 cases reporting conflict-related sexual violence and other forms of torture that women and girls are experiencing in Sudan. By the end of 2025, the number of verified cases, and I'm speaking about cases that we were able to verify because there is lots of cases that we were not able to verify, has exceeded 1,300 cases. 77% of those cases were gang rape cases, and 18% were children below the age of 18 years old. So it's a real crisis. Majority of those cases recently happening in Darfur, as sexual violence continued to take an ethnic dimensions against indigenous African tribes, driven, of course, by over 25 years of rampant impunity. I have worked in Darfur for more than 20 years, and I still remember, the moment that a very random decision was made by the Security Council in the year 2020 to seize the mission of the United Nations African Union mission, like exposing millions of people to significant risk and violence. This is in addition to, all kind of, and since then, humanitarian aid has been obstructed significantly in the region. Access to sexual and reproductive health has becoming extremely difficult, and all sort of support has been becoming largely unavailable, with extremely weakening pathways for civilian protections. So, as I said, this is happening, this suffering is happening while we are facing with significant crisis when it comes to access to humanitarian aid in Sudan. Of course, the funding cuts has been a significant issue that has affected Sudanese civilian access to humanitarian services, access to sexual and reproductive health, access to mental health. Survivors and victims of conflict, of sexual violence, they have found it really difficult to find access to services. This is happening against an ongoing flow of arms that continue in the country. External actors continue to fuel and profit from this brutal conflict with impunity. The international community has greatly failed, completely to obstruct, or to challenge the role of unchecked interventions that keeps happening in Sudan. Despite multiple reports, of course, we have heard about the panels of experts report, the panel of experts to Security Council, as well as international NGOs reports and credible media report, all documented the flow of weapons and military equipments through the borders into Darfur in violation of the Security Council arms embargo. The atrocities against women and girls in Sudan are not random. Women are targeted for who they are. They have targeted regardless of their age, regardless of their skin color or ability. It's a strategy that's used for extractions of resources and for stripping women and communities of their agency. And as I said earlier, this war is a target on our agency and on our capacity to claim, democracy and to claim good governance, a rule of law, and to claim control of our resources. Women not only in Darfur, women in different parts of Sudan has been the target of sexual violence. I have clearly remembered that we have documented cases of young women who were in Al Jazeera states and in part of Khartoum who were targeted because of being of a lighter skin color. So women were targeted for being darker skin colors and also of lighter skin colors. And these sort of violations keep happening and expanding extensively in Darfur, but it's also happening in other parts of Sudan. We're really concerned as human rights defenders and activists in the ground and fear that the genocide and violence that happened in Al-Fashir will spread to other locations where those who have fled for sheltering, like Tawila, Atina, and other regions in Sudan, Kordofan particularly, and Blue Nile, territories that are witnessing extreme drone bombarding, targeting civilians. And right now, as we are speaking, women and girls in Kordofan are exposed to heinous crimes, sexual violence, killing, and so on. So this situation, does not end or stop in areas where we are witnessing active conflict. Territories and areas within Sudan that has relative stability and witnessing high influx of displaced people is also witnessing other forms of violence against civilians and against women and girls. Sexual exploitation is quite rampant due to hunger and lack of access to food. And forced and child marriage is becoming a pattern. Communities have to give away their daughters for marriage, especially to they can't afford saying no, to armed people, and so on. Enforced disappearance, where numerous undocumented cases of civilians, women and girls have been enforcibly disappeared. Between August 2024 and December 2025, we have received reports of more than 840 women being detained by the local police and local military intelligence affiliated to Sudan Armed Forces in Khartoum, in Al Jazeera, in Kadugli, in Al Lubayd, and in Dallaire. And many of these women are facing treason charges and accused of being collaborators with RSF. So basically, territories and areas that were under the control of the Rapid Support Forces, once they moved out of these areas, communities who stays behind and they suffer the violence of the RSF, again, particularly women, they had to endure the violence of Sudan Armed Forces and exposed to accusations of treasons, and many were sentenced to death without access to legal aid at a time where the justice system is at a status of collapse, under very miserable circumstances. So, despite the fact that we have been speaking about conflict-related sexual violence from day one, survivors and victims of conflict-related sexual violence, and by the way, it's not only women and children, there is significant number of men and boys who are experiencing sexual violence in this conflict in Sudan. And we have been approached by many men and young boys. However, they were very clearly telling us that they don't want this situation to be documented, yet they are eagerly seeking just medical support, considering the physical and mental health pain that they are enduring. The health system is completely collapsed with few supplies, and personnel, a life-saving treatment. The physical and mental health of the victims is often fatal. We have documented cases of victims who committed suicide, especially those who were subjected to sexual slavery and those who were kept for a very long time, in detention by the RSF. So without access to necessary sexual and reproductive health care, including, post-rape kits, women are contracting, sexual transmitted diseases. And at this point, we have a large number of women who are dying of infections, dying of hepatitis, dying of HIV and AIDS, and of syphilis. I am speaking to physicians on the grounds and nurses who would tell me that 60% of the women they are seeing, they are victims to, or they are struggling with sexual transmitted diseases. Fistula is quite common, And Sudan has lost its only fistula clinic. It used to be based in Khartoum teaching hospital. So without access to safe contraception and safe abortions, rape survivors and victims are forced to carry unwanted pregnancy to terms. And that leads to the fact that, many children, many infants, were abandoned by the side of the road. That's an everyday occurrence. That's something that is happening on daily basis, let alone, the trauma and the mental health. The other important issue that I would like to talk about is civil society and frontline workers and humanitarian workers. The lack of support and the risk that Sudanese humanitarian worker, civil society at the front line, volunteers at the front line are enduring is unprecedented. I am aware of at least 5 women at the front line, humanitarian workers who were exposed to rape. Many were killed. We have 2 of our women volunteers working on our women community kitchens in Zamzam in North Darfur. They were shot dead as the RSF attacked Zamzam displaced camps. We have 3 of our volunteers from Al-Fashir. They are nowhere to be found. There is a large number of humanitarian workers and volunteers are missing, and nobody is talking about them. The conversation right now is because Sudan is quite dangerous. There is reliant on Sudanese frontline workers, and they are expected to navigate this brutal situation, this active conflict situation with minimal support, a lack of protections, a lack of trainings, to confront this situation. And that in itself is a real disaster. Protection of civilians remain the priority in Sudan. We are going through one of the most heinous wars in the world without any form of protections. Displaced camps who should be protected under the international law are not protected anymore. What happened in Zamzam, one of the biggest displaced camps in Sudan that was hosting over 500,000 people, in just, less than a day, thousands of people has been slaughtered. Community workers and aid workers were killed. And all this is happening with great impunity and indifference from the international law. It's the lack of funding in itself is a huge crisis, and the lack of support for Sudanese civil society, remain to be a reality that we struggle with day in and day out, So it is a neglected crisis, but it's also an intentionally neglected crisis, which is, it is quite catastrophic, and Sudan is too big, as I keep saying, to fall apart alone. The conflict in Sudan is affecting, different countries around the region, and that's something that's really happening as well, and it's very important to pay attention to. protection of civilians remain to be a priority. And it's something that should be done immediately through different modalities. Deployment of peacekeepers remains to be a necessity, and I don't know how feasible it is. We keep having conversations, at different levels with different missions, but still, there is no clarity on the possibility of this. But it's as activists and as a civil society working on the ground, we believe that deployment of peacekeepers, particularly in Darfur, is crucial to stop the genocidal act that's happening in the region. Enabling and work towards establishing a platform for direct talks between the warring parties and isolating the sponsor of the conflicts who are controlling and manipulating, and prolonging this war. It's a critical need to end this violence and to help us to reach some form of cessation of hostilities. Investing on civilian agency, investing on women and communities on the ground and in refugees and displaced camps, help us to regain our voices, help us to regain our power. It's very important, for us to have the capacity to regain our voices, and to contribute to the stability of our country, because without the voices and the will of Sudanese people, it's very difficult for Sudan to be a stable country. It's very important for the Canadian government to treat Sudan with much more kindness, contribute to the humanitarian aid of Sudan, support Sudanese civil society, invest and support Sudanese women, particularly grassroots women and grassroots volunteers who are doing the work on the ground, mainly contribute to the protections of women and girls and children and people with disability, and support Sudanese youth to access educations and to access trainings. We don't want to be trapped in this cycle of or endless cycle of violence, and militarism that will take us nowhere. Allow, Sudanese families and those who are affected by war to gain a refugee status in Canada. That's really very important. At the end, I'm just going to conclude by saying that what's happening in Sudan, it is our responsibility, absolutely, as Sudanese, and we are bearing this responsibility, but it is also a global responsibility, as James Baldwin has said, the children are always ours, every single one of them, all over the globe, and failing to cater for them, this it shows, challenges in our morality system. So please keep talking about Sudan and keep taking responsibility in advocating about Sudan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hala, for your compelling remarks and for grounding us in what is happening in Sudan today. I suppose the video for, okay, so we'll move on. I think we're short in time a little bit, and I guess we can upload the video later on. I also want to thank all our speakers for your contributions, and we now turn to our moderated discussion. Our moderator is my friend, Yona Diamond, who's also senior legal counsel. Is my partner in crime. We went through a lot of ups and downs throughout this Sudan work. And he is really a leading authority on genocide prevention and accountability. I invite you to just Google him and see some of his contributions. One thing that I would like to mention, and I think he doesn't like me, to read all his bio, but he is the, creator of the acclaimed podcast on the price of conviction. These are really two very, very important podcasts, and I really invite you to listen to them. Yona, without reading your lengthy bio, I invite you to welcome your panelists. Welcome, Yona.
Okay, yeah. I wasn't sure if we'll get seated right after. We have a truly remarkable panel for you, comprised entirely of individuals I look up to, and I'll quickly provide their brief bios so that we have more time for Q&A. Sadia Ara is a Sudanese community advocate, originally from El Fashir, North Darfur. She holds a degree in archaeology from Khartoum University and is a registered pharmacy technician at the Ottawa Hospital. A mother of 5, Sadia brings both professional experience and lived reality to her advocacy work. Having lived in Canada for over 20 years, she is deeply engaged in raising awareness about Sudan, particularly the impact in Darfur. Through her work and personal journey, she amplifies the voices of displaced Sudanese communities and speaks to resilience, care, and community responsibility. Perhaps one at a time will come up, or we'll all come up afterward. General Romeo Dallaire is the Massey College Chair in Genocide Prevention and Peace, a personal idol of mine. On my way to the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda for my first law student internship, I read Shaking Hands with the Devil and grappling with these, and it really played a formative role in bringing me here today. So thank you. He's a celebrated human rights advocate, former Canadian senator, and founder of the Dallaire Institute for Children, Peace and Security. Throughout his military career, General Dallaire most notably served as commander of the peacekeeping force in Rwanda during the 1994 genocide. At the time, General Dallaire sent information to the UN about the planned massacre, which, as we know, took more than 800,000 lives in less than 100 days. Yet the UN ordered him not to intervene and demanded his withdrawal. General Dallaire, with a small contingent of soldiers, disobeyed that order, believing that they had a moral obligation to stay, help where they could, and at the very least, bear witness to what the rest of the world chose to turn its back to. His courage and leadership earned him high recognition, including the Order of Canada, among others. As a commander, humanitarian speaker, and author, General Dallaire works tirelessly to bring attention to situations too often ignored, whether the prevention of mass atrocities and use of children in armed conflict, the impact of post-traumatic stress disorder on veterans and their families, or strategic solutions to lasting peace. Professor Nisreen Elamin is an assistant professor of anthropology and African studies at U of T. She's currently writing a book tentatively titled Stratified Enclosures, Land Capital, and Empire Making in Central Sudan, focusing on large-scale land enclosures and community resistance to land dispossession in the Gezira region. In addition to scholarly publications, Professor Elamin has published articles in a number of news outlets and magazines. She's also a member of the Sudanese Solidarity Collective, which has been supporting local emergency rooms and unions at the forefront of relief efforts in Sudan. Another advocate who I admire so deeply for her constant work during the conflict. And finally, and our last two panelists, Mamoun Hassan is an award-winning filmmaker, educator, and khatib who believes that stories shape the soul of people. For over 20 years, he's told stories behind the camera, spanning all forms, and served as an Islamic teacher. His first feature film, Purple Don't Cry, is a milestone in his filmmaking journey. He also teaches video production and cinematography courses and researches how media shapes perceptions. You should really follow his work as well. I've been watching some of his very moving videos on Sudan. He's recently gone on a mission there, actually, including to IDP camps to bear witness, and is now releasing a multi-series called Sudan Still. It's a real privilege to hear from you, particularly fresh off this trip. And finally, the Honorable Bob Rae is visitor of Massey College. Ambassador Rae recently finished his term as Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, where he championed global cooperation on peace, human rights, and sustainable development. A former Premier of Ontario and interim leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, Mr. Rae also served as Canada's Special Envoy to Myanmar and Special Envoy on humanitarian and refugee issues. Ambassador Rae received his honors in modern history from U of T, Masters in Politics as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, and graduated U of T Law. He's the author of multiple government reports and 5 books, and has been recognized with Canada's highest honors, including Privy Councillor, the Order of Canada, and the Order of Ontario. Someone who's a model for what a public official can commit his life to the greater good and humanitarian efforts around the world. So I invite our panelists all to join us. I'll sit at the end here.
Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you. What a pleasure. Nice to see you. Thank you. Just right here. How do you do? Where do you sit here?
And so once again, I'm happy to see that we have a full conference hall today. And we're here because we care. We refuse to live in a world as bystanders to genocide and mass atrocities on such unspeakable scale against targeting communities for who they are. And we really are at a crossroads, as the title of this event implies, even an existential one. And we can choose to stand up for the universal principle of the responsibility to protect, which, as Principal Orbinski mentioned, will take courage and initiative and conviction. But we have no other choice, really, because the alternative is a world where the use of violence, aggression, and even genocide to secure business and political interests run rampant. And to give some of, for those who have a little less background, again, this is the world's largest humanitarian catastrophe in the world, 14 million displaced, as Principal Orbinski mentioned, around 34 million in need. There are famines declared in now 4 areas, so the most areas of active famine in the world. The health systems have virtually collapsed, and there's no accurate number as to the death toll, but we know it could be in the hundreds of thousands. And we'll be discussing some very disturbing issues that may even bring up trauma, and just know that we are in a completely, entirely safe space to speak freely. And what's special about this panel is that we're not only united in bringing more attention to Sudan, but to actually moving Canadian policy towards our shared goals of protecting these communities, ending the violence and years of impunity for atrocities, holding the perpetrators and enablers accountable, and increasing the effective delivery of humanitarian assistance. And just to tell you quickly, at the Wallenberg Centre, we've been working towards these goals since the start of the conflict. In 2024, we put out an inquiry into the genocide against non-Arab groups, particularly the Masalit. We then launched the Sudan Task Force for Accountability and Justice, where we're pursuing litigation to disrupt conflict, litigation options, so particularly working towards the International Court of Justice. And we put out another report on atrocities against children last year, identifying external actors involved as well. And most recently, we launched the all-party parliamentary caucus for Sudan in the Canadian Parliament, and with an action plan to implement. And I asked our panelists to begin by each offering opening remarks. And quickly again, I will restate how time and time again throughout this work we watched the RSF commit massacres. These are patterns. We watched exactly how they operate throughout Darfur, from El Jeneina to Ardamata to Zamzam camp, Abu Shuk camp, and then in El Fashir. When they took El Fashir, they carried out these unprecedented massacres this past October, killing over 6,000 in just 3 days. The numbers likely in the tens of thousands. Satellite imagery and remote sensing analyses documented these, including by the perpetrators themselves over social media. So we can see really almost instantaneously the rapidly expanding pools of blood and mass graves. And just last week, Gale's Humanitarian Research Lab released another investigation into how the RSF deliberately razed over 40 farming communities to the ground on its way to ultimately emptying and committing massacres in El Fashir. And again, as was mentioned earlier, the UN then confirmed that this is in fact genocide, and the RSF is operating with an intent to destroy these non-Arab communities. So, Ms. Sadia Ara, we'll start with you in providing opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Sadia Ara. I have a bachelor's degree in archaeology, and I'm from Sudan, and specifically from Al Fashir in North Darfur. First of all, I would like to thank you, Massey College and Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights, for bringing us here.
Ms. Zara, just make sure to hold the microphone very close. Thanks.
For bringing us here to have this important conversations. It is truly an honor to be here to speak about Sudan at the time when the voices of Sudanese people, especially those who displaced it and directly affected by the war, must be heard. But more importantly, tonight I'm here as someone who carries a deep personal connection to Sudan, to the community that are currently suffering. For nearly 3 years, this war has not begun yesterday. I know genocide has happened in Sudan 23 years, and we'll still be talking about it today. But back in 2023, April 23rd, when again, the military and RSF, they began fighting, the fire again went to Darfur. 3 years. And Sudan has been facing one of the most devastating crimes in the modern history. Millions displaced people, home destroyed, and everything a human being can survive of, they erase it. In a region like Darfur, community that have already experienced a genocide and mass displacement in the past are once again facing an unimaginable violence. But for Sudanese in the diaspora, this crisis is not distant news. We wake up every single day. Every single day, I think Sudanese here, they hear the worst of the wars. It is deeply personal for me. This is our families, our neighbors, our childhood communities that are living through this hell, this reality every single day and wake up with it for the past 3 years. And but Sudan is not only the story of tragedy. It is also a story of resilience and courage and hope. Across this country, in Canada, Sudanese rally up, and other people in other side of this global, they rally up to help Sudanese that inside they have no shelters, no food, by donating whatever they can to make them a tekia. That is called a kitchen to help the people that in displacement. Most of them done by Sudanese, they're living outside and abroad. Sudanese people continue to organize, support one another, and advocate for justice, protections, and peace. Tonight, I hope our discussion help to bring greater awareness to what is happening on the ground and highlight the urgency of humanitarian crisis that need now, not tomorrow, not after tomorrow. And encourage meaningful discussion and engagement from the international community and including Canada and the audience. I wish this discussion is not be like another content. We just scroll in and see what's happened and we go to the next. I wish every one of you guys help us to exit from this crisis. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ms. Zara. Professor Elamin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be here, and to all of you for coming out here on this frigid afternoon to hear us talk about this devastating moment we're in of multiple genocides that we have collectively failed to prevent. And I just want to start by saying I think it's important to frame the war in Sudan as an internationalized counter-revolutionary war that is meant to foreclose the possibility of popular democracy and civilian rule, and to protect Sudanese elites and their international partners. I think what's happening in Sudan is often depoliticized, it's taken out of context, it's stripped of history and historical precedent, and it's excised from the broader political economy of war and resource extractivism that drives it, and that simultaneously connect the war in Sudan to Canadian mining and PR companies in the past, like Talisman Energy and Dickens and Madsen, and to Canadian weapons manufacturing companies like Sterling Cross and the Strite Group in the present, that connect death and destruction in Al-Fashir to university endowments that are invested in genocide and that are connected to a network of transnational elites who are profiting off of Darfurian, Congolese, Palestinian, and indigenous suffering and dispossession right here in our own backyards. So today I want to try to connect some of these dots, and I want to deprovincialize Sudan by talking about some of the global forces and external actors like the UAE that are fueling and benefiting from this war. The second point I want to make is around genocide denial. 20 years ago, when the genocide was being carried out in Darfur jointly by the Janjaweed, who were later formalized by the Bashir regime as the Rapid Support Forces in an effort to coup-proof his rule against the army and the army. I remember attending a panel similar to this one on a university campus in the US. I had just returned from Niala in South Darfur, where alongside a friend who had survived the genocide, we were trying to document its continued impact on people's lives and to help gather support for Darfurian-led organizing and relief efforts after the Bashir regime had kicked out most of the international aid agencies that had been operating in Darfur. And so this panel was framed as a debate around whether or not what was happening in Darfur fit the legal definition of genocide. And I remember thinking, having just interviewed survivors of ethnic cleansing campaigns, that they were debating the wrong question. We should have never asked back then whether the ethnic cleansing campaigns, the mass displacement of over 2.5 million people, the burning of villages and irrigation ditches and livelihoods, the use of rape as a weapon of war, fit the legal definition of genocide. Because if we have to ask that question, then the legal definition and the normative framework of international law that then legitimizes inaction and impunity is part of the problem and not the people experiencing mass murder. And so I'll end by saying that I remember that the debate also mirrored to some degree the genocide denial I encountered in Khartoum, even among members of my own family. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that genocide denial 20 years ago and the impunity its perpetrators enjoyed is partly what facilitates genocide in the future. When we deny genocide, we legitimize inaction and complicity in genocide. Through this denial, we fail not only the survivors of genocide, but the generations that follow, who are denied the right of return, who are denied their livelihoods, their land back. And we see this denial manifested not only in relation to Darfurians and South Sudanese, but also in relation to Palestine and to indigenous peoples here on Turtle Island as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Ambassador Ray.
Just briefly, very, very honored to be here, and I'm next to somebody who's distinguished, and I always refer to myself as extinguished. So I'm delighted to be with my friend, General Dallaire, but also to hear from the members of the panel and to hear the others who've been speaking. I want to just say a couple of things. The first thing is that I hope we can, at the end of this discussion, really try to focus on what can we do. What can we do as individuals? What can we do to influence our own government? What can we do to help to make a difference and to change policy? The second thing I would say is that the wording that says this is a failure of the international system, I have to confess that doesn't mean anything to me. Because in order to describe a failure, you have to say, well, what is it exactly? What is it that's failed? Because it's not just the, quote, international order that's failed. It's the, let's not forget the responsibility to protect. It starts with the people in the country who have an obligation to make sure that citizens and innocent people are not suffering. Then it goes on to say that, well, if that doesn't happen, then the regional partners have an obligation to stop the suffering. And then more broadly, it then turns to international specific institutions and what they can do. So I think it's important for us to be very specific, and I'm delighted with what Isrina said, because I think it's really important to focus on who is doing this. What is the identity of the actors who are committing these atrocities? And who is funding these actors? Who is fueling these actors? And what is the broader economic context that is forcing or making or allowing certain countries to say, we want all this land for ourselves, we want all this gold for ourselves? We've discussed this now for over an hour. We haven't mentioned the word gold, and we haven't mentioned the word oil, and we haven't mentioned, Nisreen did, because that's her study, the question of land and agriculture. So this is not just a local conflict. It's a local conflict which is fueled by regional actors and by global actors. We've all heard the word hegemon. I think most of us, we thought we knew what a Pokemon was. We don't really know what a hegemon is. But I think we now know what a hegemon is. And each of the hegemons has got something to say. And has doing things. And it's not just acts of commission, it's acts of omission that we have to analyze and understand. And here Canada doesn't get off lightly, because it's important to realize that while the Trump cuts to assistance and to humanitarian funding has been dramatic because it all happened in the space of 2 weeks because of Doge, just completely wiped out entire systems of assistance. Canada, together with a number of other countries in Europe, has been just steadily reducing the amount of money that we spend on ODA, on development assistance, and on humanitarian assistance. And when you think about it, these cuts are taking place at exactly the same time as the situations are becoming more dire. The situations are becoming worse. Not to diminish Sudan in any way, but don't think that Sudan is the only place where things are going backwards fast. In Myanmar, a country I know something about, and in Bangladesh, where we have 1 billion refugees who are living in camps, assistance has been reduced to a trickle. And people are not getting enough to eat, they can't get to school, and violence is increasing throughout the country of Myanmar. So we need to understand who are the actors and what can we do. And when we deal with this, we need to have steps that the government of Canada must take, things the government of Canada should be doing, and ways in which this has to be a broader part of the Canadian strategy. I think to all of the elements which the Prime Minister has set out in his Davos speech and elsewhere, the word development did not appear in the Davos speech. The concept of a humanitarian crisis was not there. And so we have to add those words and say, well, you could say that as what you've said, but now let's add these other words to the discussion. Because we cannot imagine a Canadian foreign policy that does not deal with the realities of conflict in Africa and in Asia and in Latin America and many other places, which are creating an unprecedented number of displaced people wandering around looking for a place to go. Where do they go? How do they survive? And how do they deal with the rest of the violence that then happens to civilians, particularly to women and to children? And that, I think, is a very important part of what we need to be talking about and thinking about practically. How do we take this crisis and build from it a broader understanding of what our obligations are as a country and how that means looking at peacekeeping, looking at peacemaking, looking at conflict resolution, looking at the humanitarian development and economic responses that are going to be required to deal with the nature of these conflicts. Because as I've said before, Sudan is not alone in two ways. One, because we need to understand that the people of Sudan should not be forced to weather this storm all by themselves. That's not right, because the causes of the conflict are not entirely domestic in origin. But secondly, we need to understand the global strategies that are going to be required to take this conflict as an example, not as an only case, not as only one, but as one important case among many others that we're going to have to look at and deal with as a world. But the world starts with Canada. It starts with us as a country deciding on how big is our imagination and our capacity to respond. And that's really what we should be thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Well, I'm very pleased our panelists came to give it to us straight, and General Dallaire.
Right. At the end of '93, I deployed in Cambodia with the killing fields and troops. A year and a half later, I'm in Rwanda with the genocide. 2001, I'm in Sierra Leone, where there was a war that was going on, where the war was being conducted by children on all sides. Then in 2005, I went into Darfur because the use of children, both the Janjaweed and also the rebels, and trying to work at how we can apply the optional protocol on child rights, which is the use of children as weapons of war, child soldiers. But I'm coming to 2005 when a comprehensive peace agreement was being negotiated at the time, and we were working on R2P, and Prime Minister Paul Martin was behind it extensively. And so he called me in to see what Canada could do. And I raised this because of my ultimate point, which I'll say in a moment. Brevity is not the strength of a retired general, I can tell you. And a retired senator is probably worse. But and so in a round table by his office where he meets with the, there was a discussion on what do we do in Darfur. Because he heard the comprehensive peace agreement was coming, which was not comprehensive, because when we got there, we found out that, in fact, women and children were not involved at all in the comprehensive peace agreement, but they're the ones who were being slaughtered and raped and abused and killed, of course. And the military did not want anything to do with it because they were over their head, they said, with Afghanistan and so on. Which was a similar story that I got when in Rwanda it was Yugoslavia. The diplomats were not keen on it because they were uncomfortable with this peace agreement and, in fact, what they were working towards, and so they were very much against it. The CEDA, International Development, said that, well, it's a matter of money that we can do, and he essentially turned to me and asked me, what do we do? And I said, we deploy. And we get there. So only to say that the Canadian government knew it, but didn't want to join. Found all kinds of excuses at all levels of decision making, right up to the Prime Minister, who had to ultimately go against all of them and say, no, we're going to go in, and we provided them with vehicles and so on. To UN peacekeeping force that had nothing. Didn't have a map, didn't have compass, didn't have nothing to be able to do the job. You can have 5,000 troops, but all they do is waste rations because they don't know what to do. They don't have anything to do it with. So that became a significant problem. But what really got me to the question that keeps irking me ever since is the fact that do all humans, well, put it this way, are all humans human? Or are some humans more human than others? Because at that same time, we had the tsunami going on in Indonesia. And the whole world went nuts providing aid and support to the tsunami. Meanwhile, nothing was going into Darfur. There were more people killed, injured, raped, internally displaced, and refugeed in Darfur than caused by the tsunami, but nothing. We couldn't get support, even from our own country, which was peanuts, because we used actually international development money to pay for the helicopters that were supposed to help the humanitarians, but also we needed them to move some troops and supplies around. And so as that's going on, the whole argument is presented in the General Assembly is the responsibility to protect, where 100 recommendations had been vetoed by the Americans, and so the only one that survived was responsibility to protect. And I followed that, of course, closely, and when I was with the Montreal Institute of Genocide Studies, we thought we had a problem. And the problem was fundamentally, as we see it still today, is there a will to intervene? We wrote all the rules on how to use forces and who and all and when and what equipment and so on, and we responsibilized everybody, but was there a political will to intervene? Does it exist? And we wrote a book with Frank Jock from MIGS on 11 recommendations that, guess who? Samantha Power, who was sneaking into Darfur from Chad, made a massive report, worked for Obama, and actually they implemented 3 of our recommendations, and the Canadians implemented none of them. My archives, classified archives of Rwanda, are sitting at West Point, because it's the only institution that is actually training and educating its officer corps on how to participate in preventing catastrophic failures, mass atrocities, and genocide, and how, in fact, to intervene. They are now about to all be fired. And so we have so much more to do, and so we are, in my opinion, humbly, in a revolutionary time. Not change, not reform. It is a revolutionary time. It's a time to shift gears massively, because if not, we will continue to see the absolute useless solutions of truces. In Darfur, you would see a truce in Ukraine, where I've been, and we're working with the veterans there and the children. In Gaza, in many of the countries, I'm in Colombia next week. Truces are not peace, and they are certainly not lasting peace. Yet the only solution that this male-dominated, egocentric world, misogynist in many of its institutions, and in fact paternalistic, the best it can produce is a truce. And ladies and gentlemen, we're not close to peace, let alone lasting peace.
Oh, thank you, General Dallaire. I feel like we're in those decision-making rooms with you. Thank you. Mr. Hassan.
None of you guys are going to like what I'm going to say. I'm so sorry. But I'm going to apologize before I say anything. But I'm really not optimistic at all. I am actually past hoping for the best. So I came here as a refugee. I was a young kid. I came here at 12 years old. And I remember my father when we came here. My father has been, he was jailed by the Bashir regime, and he was beaten, and he's gone through a really, really hard and difficult time. And then he left, and then when we came to Canada, I remember this label of refugee at that time, and this is like in the early 90s, it wasn't actually bad at all. Like, it wasn't, you know what I mean? Like it was very strange to me that you'd get this name and you don't feel funny about it at all. And just right now, less than a month ago, actually, I was in Al-Afad camp. Al-Afad camp is the camp where it's about 25,000 people who fled from Al-Fashir, all on foot. And it was really weird. Like, I felt like I should have been there, like with the people, like actually living there. You know, this was a feeling that I actually had. Because like there was kids that were kind of my age at the time when I came here, and there was people who kind of looked like my mom and people who looked like my dad. And they were like, I'm so sorry. I'm supposed to, Yona asked me to speak about resilience, but I'm just gonna be really real. I just felt so hopeless. Like it was terrible. Like it was just so terrible that I went there in hopes of saying, okay, you know what, I'm gonna make some sort of change. I'm gonna do something that's gonna make people like have an action. And I don't have that feeling anymore. I don't have the belief that I can do anything. I think we've just lost too many people. Like we've just lost too much in order for us to kind of go back. And I know I came here hoping to actually speak to Mu'tasim about this because I know this is the area of his studies, but I was like, how do we move forward? Like, let's say this war ended tomorrow. Like, how do you bring a people that have gone through this kind of atrocities to come together and actually have a nation again, right? Or even like a country. Like it's such, I'm telling you guys, I'm conflicted. Like I really wanted to come here and give you guys like cool things that we can do. These guys here have lived through so many of these atrocities that I think maybe they're getting used to it, but we're in a terrible situation. Like the numbers that everybody keeps talking about, all these huge numbers, I think they're, first of all, I hate them. I hate numbers. I hate when people, I just want to throw something at people when they mention numbers. I think numbers dehumanize us as people, as Sudanese people. Numbers don't cry. Numbers don't bury children. Numbers don't like heal women who are traumatized for forever, right? Like they're done. And in this trip right now, for instance, when I was looking at the kids, and they had been out of school for the past 3 or 4 years, and then I went after that, which is just the weirdest thing ever. From Sudan, I actually went to visit also refugees, Sudanese refugees who are in Jordan, who've been there since 2004, 2005, waiting. There's nothing, like they just do. Imagine waiting for 20 years, you're just waiting. And no future, like nothing. Like people who are just born in refugee camps and just waiting. It's a mess. Like we live in a messy, like it's in such a messy world. And I don't know how other people are just walking around eating and drinking and living their lives. Like honestly, when I was there, I just couldn't, I didn't know how to come back, right? And I'm doing some humanitarian work right now, and I'm just doing some storytelling work. Honestly, not because I think it's gonna make a difference. Like I genuinely don't believe so, but I can't sleep. So I need to like throw myself at work so I can actually like just become exhausted, so I can just fall asleep. And my wife is here, like she'll tell you, I just come to bed exhausted, so I don't have to think of anything, you know. I know maybe I should have came with a solution like everybody else kind of tried to come with, but I don't know. I don't know how to do that. But I just honestly want you to know that this is kind of the dilemma that I think so many Sudanese people are living through, even though they talk all this hopeful nonsense, right? But it's devastating, you know.
Thank you, Mamoun. I agree with you. I also hate these numbers. I really do, and I'm guilty actually of just using it. But you know, nothing can replace or fill the pain of losing an individual, a friend, family member, and the pain that stays with you for life after being victimized or traumatized in these ways. So thank you so much for sharing and bringing us back down to earth. Ms. Zara, can you describe maybe some of the needs on the ground, particularly in and around El Fashir, and what justice might look like for genocide survivors or communities displaced?
Let's go back a little bit back, like back in 2005, 2003, when the genocide has happened in Darfur. And 2004, there is the biggest INP camp in a Zamzam and a surrounding area. So a whole generation born in that camp, they have a hope. One of them, they may be gonna be our presidents. Maybe one of them gonna come and reform our justice system, that they failed them. Maybe one of them, they're going to bring the peace that is missing. And those generations, once again, 2025, in April, all the international community saying genocide is going to happen. It's just a matter of time. When? Everybody knows, definitely. I don't think the governments or all the international body, they don't know the genocide is happening if RSF calling people by name, they call Zurga, that is in black, you not belong to this place. Why black people, they don't belong to Darfur? Because we know Darfur is full of resource, from gold, just a piece, a small piece of mine. Between 2000 and 2002 and 2010, the New York Times, they said, UAE, United Arab Emirates, they just took from that place 110 billion worth of gold. And with the war right now, just January to September 2005, the war is going on. People are dying, starving. And then UAE took 15 billion worth of gold from the same place. The world failed, absolutely failed to save Darfurian people. They give them the green light to go because before the Zamzam 2024, just 2023, in Janina, there is a whole Masalit community, black people, gone. Just like that. No condemnations, no deal to at least save the civilian. Okay, the RSF now had the green light. They went to the Zamzam camp, the biggest, like has more than 500,000 people. In just overnight, most of them die or fled to other neighboring small city. And then they know they need the bigger fish to fry. That is their Fashir. And they know they have ethnic group, especially, say, Zakawa is the most dominant. They have Masalit, some of them. They have Berti, they have 4. Those are tribe, they want to get out of the sight. They surround the city, they cut completely off from any food resource that come into the city. Actually, in Yale University, they're talking about 41 small villages. I know most of them, small villages across Al-Fashir. So those, the hub people, they do farming and they bring it to the city of the Fashir because it's a bigger city. So they sell their stuff and they go back. So those the villages that supply Al-Fashir with the food security. So they know how to get to the Fashir and how to starve the people. They cut all the food supply, burn the villages. More than 68% of the people fled the villages because you cannot stay when the killing is going. You have to save your life at least. People ending up in Al-Fashir for 18 months. That means more than 447 days. Women, elderly, young children, they're pleading the world for help. Please help us. We are dying here from starvations, malnutrition, not just the kids, adults. The Raoul Wallenberg Centre, they do have a report that adults show an already sign of malnutrition. So imagine a child go through that. If you're adult in that city, if you're starving. Still the world did not do anything. Absolutely. 1948, when the Geneva Convention say, never again. This phrase, we heard it many times, but they really, miserably, they fail Darfurian, especially Al-Fashir. I can't say anything that you can see blood from the sky image on the ground. That is just unimaginable pain. I always am thinking how those people, they die. I remember one, they got into the Fashir, one of my cousins, she's actually the youngest parliamentarian in Sudan history. When the RSF killed her, they told her dead body, get up if you can. And I have that question in my mind. What if one of the children that they born in Zamzam camp, in refugee camp, that displaced from their place for many years, 20 plus years, and then still they died there. One of them is wake up and tell us what have done to us, what you did to the world to save us, what we're gonna say. And sometime I just thinking, what if Al-Fashir is somewhere in Europe? Is gonna happen? Actually, I never thought, I never see the skin as a color for a person, because we all God-given human being. But this one, it actually has come to my mind. Why? If Al-Fashir, if it's just a city in Europe, I'm sure if you just give a survey to these people, they will say it will never happen that, what is happening in Al-Fashir. Right now, after the fall, Southern are dead. There is no healthcare system at all. Actually, there are no people they left inside. Whoever left inside, they force it to stay inside. They have no will. They're just in a big jail, and they have no place to go. People, they fled by foot to almost 65 kilo to Tawila. But when they arrived there, there's absolutely minimum people, they're waiting for them, health organizations to help them. There is no medicals, there is no doctor, no nurses. They need somebody to help the malnutrition children, women that are pregnant. They have seen nothing. Actually, I have one of them, they told me in Tawila, and it is called January. She told me, what? I have a top, Sadia. The top is this one. It's a cultural Sudanese dress. She told me, I have a top. I wear them at the daytime because I have to cover myself. But at the nighttime, I have to put as a blanket for my kids. That is how situation is. That's how the situation, they turning the world, turn their eyes, they deaf ear from what happening in Darfur, and especially Fashir. Because, and she's telling me, you know what I'm doing? I have to put a fire, and I have to stay awake. She cannot sleep because if she slept, because the place is just surrounded by wood and by cut trees to just make a small shelter. And that is just fire hazard if you slept, and then it's a lot of people die from this situation. They're lighting at the fire so to keep them warm to sleep, and then they will not wake up because the fire is spread in that huts, and they pass away. That is most what we need right now, humanitarian aid. Canada, and it is a lie, they can provide that. And on the top of that, we completely forgotten about the women, the young ladies that rapes. And we have a culture, actually in Darfur, women, they have to be tough. A man, he cannot cry, because that's a sign of weakness. And what they do, They bring the women in front of their mom, in front of their dad or the brother, and they rape them. It's the most humiliating thing a human being can have, because you take the dignity from that man. You did everything is unimaginable to their daughter, to their wife, and they cannot lift up their head and look into that person's eye. And they cannot have that conversations. So we need people that specialize in those trauma to sit with Sudanese women, and especially Darfurian, especially the one that they saw unimaginable pain, rapes, displacement. Let them to talk freely what they think. Because sometimes the talking with someone you trust, especially from medical health, or even from a healing person, it could be heal you. And if all the women in Darfur are broken this way, they know why they target women, because they know when you target women, you broke the whole community. Because always I feel the women, they keep the community together. They protect their community, they protect their kids, they protect their husband, they protect their brother, they're protector. Even we are weak, but we hold our weakness and we're able to protect people that's so closest to us. And what we need the most is humanitarian aid right now. We don't need to wait tomorrow, because tomorrow, maybe 150,000, they will be die from starvations. And the raining season is coming, actually. In Sudan, the raining season is in June, middle of June. And people, they don't have even shelter. Right now, this one, it cannot provide me from a raining sky. It will not. So they need that aid to go ASP. Please, whoever listening, don't just take this and you leave. Please take it in your heart. Help them, because absolutely, really, they need the help. And thank you for that.
Thank you for your strength, Ms. Zara, and for sharing your moving words. On the note about humanitarian support, I want to turn to Nizreen and Mamoun, a two-part question, because I know both of you have done Herculean work, raising funds, and doing work on humanitarian relief, providing life-saving services. So, one, how do grassroots, civilian-led humanitarian groups operate or navigate through such dangerous conditions? And two, what are some of the benefits or practical ways of donating directly to localized groups versus maybe the role of international charities? And what are some of the problems standing in the way of more effective delivery?
So through the recent trip that we've actually made, that we found out that there's this what we call like Hayat al-Ahya, or just in a sense kind of like neighborhood type of commissions, right? Just the neighborhoods themselves, where they actually kind of gather together and they just find the young brothers and those who are able to kind of do some sort of work. Those are oftentimes always able to actually get and know those who are in need before anybody else. And they live in the area, and they speak the language of also both sides of the war. Do you know what I mean? And I found that those have been able to get the aid faster than anybody else, but the problem is that they haven't been able to actually get it from the outside. And that's a genuine real problem. Now, I don't speak of Darfur because I don't really know much about it. I try to visit, and it's an impossibility at this moment. Right, but in the actual cities outside, for instance, like when I was in Khartoum and I was in these places that, you know, the ghost towns that have now been ghost towns, Medani, Al Jazeera, and so on, those are the ones who are actually doing this help. Like, they're, my wife finds these women who are just able to cook, which is very weird sometimes, like the way you see it, right? Who are just able to cook, and she sends them money that goes through this very funny way of like, it goes everywhere. It goes from here to a guy in Toronto, right? And a guy from Toronto to a guy in Egypt, and a guy to Egypt. Like, it takes a couple of days for the money itself to arrive, so you can just, oh, listen, go ahead and cook us a meal that can feed 100 people. And it's expensive. It's so weird. Like, I always think, like, why is it so expensive to feed food in Sudan? Sudan should not be. Like, it's a place where it produces so much food. And you know, I come from a place called the Jazeera, for instance, in Madani, this, you know, back in the 85s, we were called Sallat Ghiza al-Alam, which is basically like the basket of the food of the world, because we weren't even allowed to throw seeds of mangoes and stuff because it'll grow and it'll just cause disruption. Like, that's how quickly food grows in Sudan. It's such a weird situation, right? That you have such a fertile land and so much like khayrat and good and stuff like that, and then you can't give it to people. People are still hungry. People are still starving. People are going through the funniest ways of doing it. So that's how the situation is like. And every family member is doing the same thing, where you're just sending food, you're sending money to your family members to, like, eat from some of this, and also give it to our next door neighbor, because then that's those are the calls that you get from people. Like, literally, I get calls from cousins who say to me, listen, remember our next door neighbor? Well, his daughter passed away. You know what I mean? Can we get some sort of help to actually even bury her? Can we get some sort of food so we can actually gather the people around? And I see that that's more effective in getting to people, but it is just so small scale. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just not enough, right? And I say huge donations also that are going through, for instance, Sadaqat is a really reputable organization that is on the ground. It is Sudanese run. It is fully charitable. It's in Canada. There's SAPA, Sudanese American Physicians Association, that is on the ground as well. They have people there. They have amazing, crazy stories of doctors who could have left the country and just decided to stay. They said, no, we're not leaving. So those are sending in a lot of money, but they also talk to me about, you know, the challenges that they themselves are actually facing when they apply for grants, and from the UNHCR, for instance, from the World Food Bank. Like, they always talk about, there's this crazy things that we have to go through to get the funding itself, like asking for receipts of how much this is. You're in a war zone. It makes no sense. Why is the price of rice today more expensive than it was yesterday? Because it's a war, and that's how it works. So, like, the reporting itself is becoming really problematic, and people are living like we should be in Canada, where you could just go to, like, Kim Smart, buy it and give it to other people. That's not the way that it's working. So honestly, we're struggling. It's a real issue that we're having here. I know that we talk about all of these things. I've just actually been appointed as the SAPA Canada country lead. And in my first meeting with our lawyer who's registering the organization, get us a charitable organization, the first thing he says, listen, you got to be really careful when you're sending things to Sudan. Guess what? You are going to be audited. CRA already knows and loves Muslims and just wants to audit us for no reasons. So now add to this the complexity of the fact that you're in this war zone and in a country that's been labeled as a harbor of terrorists. And like, it's just so many complexities. And I just want to feed people. Like, I just want to provide a meal, right? So those are the two challenges we have. Like, we know people who are really effective. We can't get the money. That's the number one thing. And then we have people who have a huge amount of money and they just can't get it to the people. Like, it's just a mess.
Yeah, that's a extremely important, crucial point, Nisreen.
Yeah, so I'm an academic and I'm also a woman, so I've written everything down. And so, so I was in Sudan when the war broke out in April of 2023, and I was with my 3-year-old at the time. It was the end of Ramadan, just like now, and I would go out during the so-called curfews in search of food. And I was never alone. There were youth from the neighborhood resistance committees who would accompany me, make sure there were no bullets flying as we sprinted between neighborhood stores and stood in bread lines. And when we left Khartoum, they helped map our evacuation plan. They helped us load a car full of people and belongings. While they chose to stay behind to support, especially for those who weren't able to leave, whether they were disabled or financially couldn't leave, etc. In the village we were staying in, just south of Khartoum, the local resistance committee enlisted us in organizing food drives, and soon after they formed an emergency response room. And there are now about 700 of these emergency response rooms across the country that emerged organically out of the network of about 8,000 or so neighborhood resistance committees that formed the backbone of the 2018-19 revolution. And I would say that in the absence of an adequate international aid response and a functional state, they are leading food and medicine distribution efforts, they're organizing communal kitchens, they're coordinating evacuations and protection activities, they're setting up ad hoc emergency clinics, rape crisis centers and women response rooms, they're converting defunct schools into shelters, they're repairing and restoring public services such as water and electricity, and they're retrieving and burying dead bodies. Over the last 3 years, their communal kitchens have fed millions across Sudan with minimal resources, especially after the USAID cuts. About 80% of their funding was lost through that. Many of these kitchens are now shutting down due to lack of external sources of funding. And in Darfur, there are some now agricultural response rooms that are growing food for subsistence and survival. In Al-Fashir, the ERRs, alongside other grassroots mutual aid groups, have organized to evacuate people who were trapped as the RSF besieged the city and massacred tens of thousands in a matter of days and weeks in the midst of a near total media blackout here in Canada. I don't know if people remember this, but there were tens and thousands who were killed, and we didn't hear any of it in the news. These groups also organize clandestine food distribution drives and are operating now in places like Tawila, where survivors fleeing Al-Fashir have sought refuge. And as Hala was mentioning earlier, many of these volunteers are targeted by both sides, in part because I think they represent the biggest threat to the legitimacy of any form of military rule. And so in the summer of 2023, a group of us here at the University of Toronto, it's since expanded, formed something called the Sudan Solidarity Collective, which through our partnership with the Darfur Diaspora Association, which is a registered charity here in Canada, has been supporting communities in Darfur. And the Darfur Diaspora Association since 2006 has been supporting communities in Darfur. And together we've raised over $1 million for these emergency response rooms and mutual aid groups. We also support a farmers union that is growing food to support people in the Jazeera at a time, I think, when it's especially important for people to be able to stay on their land when the risk of land grabs is high. And so if you'd like to support any of these groups, you can go to sudansolidarity.com. 70% of our donors are monthly $10, $20, $75 donors, which helps us sustain the support. And facilitate a kind of people-to-people solidarity. Of course, this support is a drop in the bucket of the actual need on the ground. And it's actually very difficult to move money from Canada to Sudan because of the decades-long sanctions regime that exists. And in addition to that, you have PayPal and GoFundMe that are constantly taking money, but also making it very difficult for people to release money. So I think that's one concrete thing that Canada can do, is to lift all of those restrictions, right? And to make it much easier for us to actually support groups in addition to what everybody else has said. Thank you.
Thank you for these real practical steps we can all pursue. Moving on, I'm aware of time, and I want to leave at least 20 minutes for the audience Q&A. Well, I wanted to get to the role of external actors because, you know, if we turn our eyes away from the source and the drivers of this conflict, then the humanitarian needs will continue to grow. And I think that's why it's so important to get really targeted, in our approach to pressuring those actors. And I know, you know, the UAE is, of course, the main backer of the RSF, and, you know, many have said that without their support, the RSF's operations and campaigns would collapse because they rely so heavily on the UAE. But not only the UAE, regional countries are providing, there's Chinese-made weapons, the Russian Wagner and then Turn African Corps Group. Iran is providing drones to the SAF, and Kenya is serving as a hub for RSF leadership. Ethiopia now hosts a camp for RSF fighters, and other neighboring countries have been also used, but mainly as intermediaries to source the weapons and the RSF's business empire that's based in the UAE. Canada still is lagging behind, for instance, many of its allies, US, UK, and others, in terms of sanctioning UAE-based entities that are instrumental to the RSF's operations. Ambassador Ray, if you're comfortable, can you speak on why it is the case that that this can kind of go kind of under the rug in terms of international politics, and why this is happening without a higher level of scrutiny?
The UN system is complex, but it's also ultimately understandable. It's not that difficult. 5 countries have a veto in the Security Council. If you want to have an effective peacekeeping mission, you have to have the support of the Security Council. And that is extremely difficult for a variety of reasons to get those 5 countries to agree to it. But it's also difficult to get other countries like Canada to agree to pay for it, because the appetite in Ottawa and in the military for UN engagement is nil. And that's a real problem. That's been a problem in Haiti. It's been a problem in a number of areas. And I have some scars that I can share with Romeo in these battles that you have internally to try to get some thinking to change and to get into a different situation. With respect specifically to the UAE is a country that has a great deal of influence in the UN system. For one reason, it's got money, and it's got an ability to have regional influence, and it's a country that people pay attention to. We've seen that from who's going to Dubai, who's traveling there, and who's engaging with it. I think that the side of this issue that really has not had the kind of level of exposure that it should have is this question of who is funding the RSF, how are they getting their weapons, how are they getting their resources, and who is funding the SAF, and who is responsible for that. Because we have these 2 highly militarized organizations that have a long history in the country that have developed an extraordinary level of weaponry with which to attack each other, and above all, with which to attack the civilian population. And I don't think this issue has achieved a sufficient level of understanding in the media in Canada. I think we need to do more to make sure that happens, that we have outlets. It's harder in today's media frame than it was 30, 40 years ago for reasons we all understand. But as difficult as everything is that's been described, and the reasons why it's hard not to despair, I have to say, thank you, that, by the way, for those of you who are alarmed, I don't have a cold. I have some sort of an allergy that has affected me the last couple of days, so you have no reason to fear that this is spreading. No. It's all right. It's all right. But as I was saying, I think it's really critically important that we understand that, yes, it's difficult, and it's tragic, and it's horrendous, and there's lots of reasons why people might despair and say this is hopeless. I just want to say this because I think I feel like I have to. Speaking very personally, I've been through moments of despair in my life. But ultimately, I learned that Actually, I don't have the luxury of despair. And it is a bit of a luxury, because if you're on the ground, if you're going to feed your kids, you got to keep going. You have to keep going. And you have to provide them with a sense of why we're doing this and how we can do it. And you have to take the step-by-step approach to say, how are we going to get out of this? Where do I go next? How do I do this? And the same thing is true. Yes, the World Aid System is broken, and the big agencies and the big UN agencies and the big non-charitable have a difficult time embracing change and getting things into communities. Yes, it's hard to get stuff into Sudan. Yes, there are barriers. Sally Armstrong's here, who's been doing a lot of work in Afghanistan. And she knows, I mean, we've been through these conversations. It is tough. It is really tough. But you got to keep trying, and you have to keep doing it, and you have to keep persuading governments this is why it needs to change. And governments eventually will respond when they see that this is the direction of a public opinion. So I don't think we can afford to give up, and I don't think we can afford to despair. It's a luxury none of us has, and we shouldn't let it take over our willingness to engage and see what can we do from a human level.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Can I follow up on
Yes,
that?
absolutely.
Payan and Yona and Tessin, we all wrote an op-ed. Oh, sorry, my voice is not loud enough.
It's for the online.
On Darfur, with 4 recommendations, to sanction the RSF, to support accountability on the ground and the process of bringing people to account, the emergency immigration process that could assist in an hour. But immigration and internally displaced has got to be brought together too, not just immigration, and immigration not only here, but assisting other nations who are absorbing immigrants. Then join or create a coalition to prevent the further atrocities in Sudan and draw on its reputation as an influential middle power to play a lead role in coordinating policy responses. There's just one problem. We gutted our diplomatic corps. We gutted our presence in the international community. I am tired of going around Africa in many countries and being told that, oh yes, those you know Québécois, because I don't speak French, I speak Québécois, which is 18th century French. Grand parleur, petit faiseur. Big talker, little doer. We have gone under the radar, and it's all based on self-interest, local requirements, local needs, and minutiae tactical traumas of somebody taking a helicopter to go on vacation, to other simplicities that are peanuts compared to what the needs are and what these people should be concentrating on, instead of fighting off the media who are incredibly hungry. I was in front of the Senate Committee on Human Rights and the Law in the States, and it was on Darfur. I was with Denzel Washington at the time, and the Republican senator started it off by simply saying, I don't believe in the UN. 25% of all the money that goes to the UN goes through Swiss bank accounts. There's really no accountability, and we're wasting our money, putting our money into the UN. To which I said, Senator, I said, are you trying to tell me that for every dollar in the trillion that you are expending in defense, that you're getting $1's worth of military capability? Can you tell me that? I said, it's peanuts. what's being skimmed off. The big money has never really appeared. We're not talking in humanitarian aid in billions. We're talking about it in dollars, in hundreds, and maybe a couple thousand, and so on. Until the world realizes that we are all equal human beings in different scenarios with some frictions that can be resolved by those who will and want to and commit themselves to resolution, we will continue to attrit each other and, in fact, simply destroy each other. And so, ladies and gentlemen, there are solutions. Yeah, it might be long term. But if there is a will and an optimism, which I have still, to want to bring revolutionary changes into the processes, into the systems, into the organizations, that we have women that are equal, committed to actually being listened to and being able to put their input into this male-dominated structure of the world, that we all, men created everything. Now if we bring the other half of humanity into it, now that we can talk to the whole of humanity, maybe in 20 years we might start to build something far more sophisticated with the Zs and the As than we are right now, where we are fiddling, ladies and gentlemen. Meanwhile, they're being slaughtered by the tens of thousands. When I was in Darfur in 2005, we were over 200,000 dead. I visited, I was in the camps, I saw in the villages, I saw the men were being shot in the refugee camps. The women were being raped as they go out. There was a principle out there that said by the Janjaweed that we will rape these African-based women in order to create a new race, in order to get rid of the African base. So the sectarian and religious and so on, cultural changes, they're all frictions that we're making them as if we're all different, while in fact we're all equal, but with some frictions that can be resolved, but not by men alone. Forget it.
Thanks, General.
That's my short version.
Thank you. Just really quickly, before we get to the audience, I do want to bring it back to Canada. And if really quickly, General Dallaire, Ambassador Ray, maybe you can split in answering this really quickly. In your experiences, do you believe that Canada carries still unique credibility and influence to take a stronger leadership role in atrocity response? Like, what will other governments around the world do when they see parliamentarians pass a motion, pass reform legislation, make statements? What will that do, and what sort of weight will that carry internationally when we stand up for what we believe in?
I think it's all about what, I mean, this may not be the answer you want, but I would say two things. One is, it's not about what we do alone, it's what we do with others. And that is critical. We delude ourselves as Canadians if we think that because we were involved in peacekeeping in 1956, the rest of the world thinks, wow, what a country, it's just amazing. It's not about what you did 60 years ago, it's about what are you doing now? And how are you committed now? So, but I would say that's on the slightly critical side, but I would say on the other side, there's no reason why we can't do more, and there's nothing that should stop us from doing what needs to be done. So we can't do it. I agree completely with Romeo when he says we have the ability to do it. It's just a matter of do we have the political will to do it.
Peacekeeping was 3% of our activity and costs. 97% during the Cold War was how to kill Russians. And then I end up in Rwanda with Russians and Hungarians and Poles who I had spent 30 years learning how to kill, to try to save other people, bring them all together. Europe is rearming. It's forgetting Africa. Africa is the soft underbelly to Europe. And until we can bring Africa back to a stage where in fact we realize that it is in our self-interest, because that's the dominating theme. No casualties or fear of casualties. And secondly, self-interest. If we can make this our self-interest, that it makes sense for us to do this because it's in our self-interest, then we will have political will. Yeah. And I do believe that it's only through this, but much more, a hell of a lot more, of commitment by men and women and the youth of this nation.
Thank you,
very rapidly, the last election, 1.9 million votes between the ages of 18 and 25 were not used in Canada. When I go to universities and they tell me, we don't know what to do, we're not sure what we can do, we don't have the power. And I said, you don't know what you're doing. I said, if a prof takes 50 students and goes to a poll, he might change the person who's sitting in Ottawa by 50 votes. The youth of this nation hold the balance of power in our country, in their votes. And they're not using it. But some of them are awakening to that. And it's going to move some of us aside if we stop putting obstacles in their path. I am convinced.
Thank you. Yeah, quickly, before we move to the audience, really quickly, Mamouna and Nisreen, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to tell you what's actually being said in the Sudanese Canadians WhatsApp groups, okay, just so you guys know this, because I know they're not in those, I'll include you, right? But the fact is that literally the same week when we're actually sharing with the PMO images of the actual the straight group armored vehicles on the streets in Sudan, in Khartoum, and also surrounding Al-Fash, and also we're sharing with them the Sterling group's armored, their stignia, the thing that they put on their shoulders. Anyways, documenting the fact that Canada can be complicit. And this is a problem, and we're sharing this with the PMO's office, right? He just goes to the UAE, and not a word of condemnation. This is what's being said here, okay? At the same time, when we're also begging and asking to bring our family members from Sudan, right? They're dragging their feet, asking for ridiculous things like biometrics in a country in a war, asking us to pay their way, like pay for them, while we're still supporting them while they're in a war, and then all of a sudden we have a change of a government with priorities, and all of a sudden those who should have come here are now a part of the actual immigration process. Let's just bring them in the next 8-10 years. Those are people who are literally waiting to just leave a country that we don't know where the war is going to end. We do not know when it's going to end. And at the same time, this is, again, I'm just telling you what's in the WhatsApp groups. At the same time, everyone is mentioning how quickly Canada was able to move and bring Ukrainians to Canada.
Absolutely.
And we're told by the elders of our community, don't bring that up, because Canada's not racist. By the way, this is a thing that my dad used to say to me all the time back in the days. I used to have a racist teacher, and he was documented, and I come to him, Dad, he's just racist. Like, there is no racism in Canada. This is still being said by the elders in our community right now, by the way, because they were brought by the Liberal government. So they can't really believe that. But this is what's happening here. And yet, when the young people are actually speaking to these elders, like it's documented. They don't like you here. They don't want you here. Stop coming here. Leave. Literally, this is what we're actually saying to our parents at this moment here, and we don't have a choice. We do not have a choice. So when we talk honestly about Canada, I'm sorry, guys. It's not the same. It's not the same country that everybody's been talking about here. It has shown its true colors. It's been shown to us. We've been seeing it for a long time. The priorities for Carney is saving money, and that's it. And that's it. And it's disappointing, and it's hurtful, because we voted for him. We voted for his party. Do you see what I'm saying to you? Like, you won't find a Sudanese guy who voted for Conservatives. If you do.
Yeah. I'm just very conscious.
I am sorry. Let's leave a little bit of time. This is the short WhatsApp discussion.
Yes. And a shout out to the Sudanese Canadian Community Association doing so much for all their tireless efforts. Nizreen, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just very briefly, I think the problem is Canada's self-interest to some degree, right? In the sense that Canadian mining companies have been implicated in the past in state violence in Sudan. Canadian weapons manufacturing companies are currently implicated, and the Canadian government hasn't done anything to close the loophole that allows Canadian weapons to get routed through the United States to then end up in the UAE and in the hands of the RSF in Sudan in the same way that weapons are ending up, in the hands of Israel. And so I think there's a way that we also have to not approach this as we care, but rather we have a responsibility here to hold these companies accountable and also to launch a robust refugee policy that reflects the scale of the crisis, right? At the moment, the ratio between Sudanese and Ukrainians admitted to Canada is a 1-to-100 ratio. I want you to sit with that for a minute. 1-to-100 ratio, right? And so that in of itself, I think, needs to really make us question the immigration system itself, right? And the policies that exist when we're sending weapons on the one hand, but not accepting refugees on the other.
It's complicity.
Thank you.
Right, and finally, the final point that I want to make is that, we didn't really get to talk about this, but the UAE's role in Sudan, along with other external actors, right, is one that it's not only extracting gold, it invested, along with Saudi Arabia, $27 billion in Sudanese land, real estate, infrastructure, and ports before this war began. And so one of the reasons this war continues is because they're trying to protect their interests, right? They're trying to ensure that there is military rule in order to facilitate their interests in the region that expand beyond Sudan to the Horn of Africa, if you look at all the port projects that they're building. And because the UAE is one of the Canada's main trading partners in the region, right, in its strategic allyship with the United States right now, in its war against, Iran and Lebanon, et cetera, Sudan becomes the collateral damage here. And I think that is very, very important for us to keep in mind, because unless we can sanction the RSF, but we also need to think about a strategy that boycotts and sanctions the United Arab Emirates, right, that isolates them, okay?
Yeah.
Because that's really where the leverage is. And they're actually the ones who are driving policy towards Sudan and others in the region, US policy, Canadian policy towards the region. So I just want to end on that note that I think it's very important for us to consider. And not only, the UAE is not the only harmful actor in this war, but it is one of the most significant.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. I didn't want to cut anyone off because I think this is just the audience needs to hear this. So let's open it up quickly to final questions. Yes, Faisal, we'll start with you.
Many thanks for all of you. Professor and other, I heard the name of the involvement of UAE is greatly involved, according to what you said. I would like to tell you that I had received the visit of the ambassador of UAE 3 times at my office complaining about that. And he showed me the report of European Union and United Nations about what's going on in Sudan, and without mentioning the name of UAE involvement, military pushing some side against the other in Sudan. What do you explain to this point of view, please? I would like to hear from all of you, if it's possible.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to ask the question. I'm in school right now for a human rights degree, so I'll really value your input and everything you have to say. I just need clarification on what type of humanitarian help that you're asking for. We've talked a lot of things. We've talked about misogyny. We've talked about rape for children and women. And obviously, this is the Sudanese people asking that of Canadian people when we deal with this every day in our own city. As a former frontline worker, you just described my day in the first presentation. I deal with rape victims. I deal with children that get raped in the childcare sector. And our own government here does not really address that or put a lot of infrastructure to how to stop that. So are you asking for monetary aid, or are you asking for education? Because Sudan is a country that's obviously Islamic, which is based on deep pedophilia roots. So are the women there asking for strategies on how to end the suffering, or do you just want money to continue the suffering for another day by being able to feed yourselves? Thank you.
Oh, sorry. You mentioned UAE and Saudi Arabia. What are the other external forces involved?
Well, let me just come back on this one quickly. First of all, I think it's important to recognize that, in answer to Faisal's question, and it relates to your question as well, if you are developing a consensual report at the United Nations, you can rest assured that the report will not say very much. And that's the problem. So you need to come at it from a different perspective. You need to come at it from looking at, what are the legal reviews within the UN system doing? What is the assessment of a number of non-UN agencies which are doing independent fact-finding and producing reports that actually name names, like Yona and others who've been able to do this? The second thing I'd say is it isn't just one country that's responsible for what's happening. It is a number of countries that each are pursuing what they perceive as their own interest, that are attempting to invest in the situation either militarily or in terms of financial investments and other ways in which they are trying to control or assert their interest, including a number of neighbors, countries in the region that are doing this, and also significant powers that also have their own views as to what they think would be best to emerge. And that all has to be understood. But the steps that we can take all have to do with what we need to do as a country and what we need to convince other countries it's in our interest to do collectively to deal with the severity of the humanitarian crisis. And my last point would be this one, and that is we cannot afford to have a selective lens which says, sorry, I'd love to talk to you about Sudan, but we're really busy with the Iran war at the moment, so we can't think about anything else. That, we don't, again, I've used this phrase before, but as individuals, we have to have room in our heart to understand, in our vision and in our understanding, to know that there are many, many competing and different conflicts going on around the world. And the fact is we have to pay attention to all of them and be able to respond to all of them. The biggest challenge we face with public opinion is people will say, I'm sorry, I've got too much on my mind. I can't worry about that at the moment. I have to worry about my own situation, my own self. And I understand when people say that to me, which people say quite a lot, quite spontaneously, but governments also say it. And the fact is we can't afford that kind of a selective lens in what is happening. We have to understand what is happening. We have to listen to people. We have to listen to the WhatsApp groups from every community, and we have to be able to pay attention to them and say, okay, how do we respond to this effectively? How are we going to respond in a way that's going to make a difference? And I think that's the approach that we have to take. And I think that's important.
Thank you, Ambassador Ray. Do we have time for maybe two more, and then I guess we might have to move to the closing remarks. And I want to also say that we're going to create an outcome document. I know we've heard a lot of different recommendations tonight. We want to bring this forth to our Canadian Parliamentary Caucus to push for us on all these action items and really whittle it down. So yeah, we'll take a few more. Yeah.
We've heard that racial and/or ethnic animus is a powerful factor behind the genocide, motivating it. And we've heard about economic factors, gold and oil, for instance. The word religion has not been mentioned, And my question is, does religion play a part in this catastrophe?
I don't know if you want to talk about the makeup of Darfur in terms of the actual Muslims, but it's majority Muslims. There are Christians who are there, but this war right now is literally not separating between them, between Muslims and Christians. It is literally. And it's complex, right? Because it's just not one reason, right? Like sometimes you always say, okay, is it resources or is it actually like racism? But sometimes you can play the two together to actually get a goal, right? And the truth of the matter is that it is funded for resources, but racism is weaponized. That's literally the way that you can actually see it. I'd rather actually have Sadia respond to that. Yeah.
As person, I'm from Darfur, so my entire life, I've lived there. So we never have like a religions talking about it. We are all Muslim there, but we all living in peaceful. Like you're treating your neighbor like your own, your mother, your brother, your sister. We living in not houses like it's crossed by wall. So if you're in you have 3 walls in between other house. So you can call your neighbor, hey, you give them the food, they give you back. And you cook in 1 meal, you ending up, we have 3 meals from each other. So this is the community we live in. We never have a religious problem ever. Someone from Darfur tell you, oh, I'm a Christian, or I'm a Muslim, or I'm a Muslim Sunni, or I'm Muslim Shi'i, or never we have that conversation ever until the other part of the world, they came in and they see superior for the people that with a light skin, and they see the people with the darker skin under. So they funding the people with the lighter skin to get rid of the people with the darker skin, the one that they actually, like indigenous people, this is their land. This is their land. They cannot leave their land and they go anywhere. So this is where their mother, their father, the whole generations raised there. They're farming. They're raising cattle. We have #1 producer of Arabic gum. If you can, the whole Darfur regions, we have tons of the fertile lands. And we have the rainy season that people really, they never, like we have the food security before the war started from 2003. But after they divided Darfurian as a lighter skin and the darker skin, and then it's done by whom? Beginning is done by the government of Sudan, al-Bashir. They done to just, because some people, they rise, especially from my tribe, I'm from Zakawa tribe. So when they saw the injustice above the resource that the government taken from us, and then we don't get anything back. We don't have hospital like others when you go to other cities. Yeah. We don't have funding schools. We don't have anything. When people, they start raising their voices and they're telling, hey, we need to part of that piece of cake.
Thank you. Sadia, I know we have a lot of time to go into the disparities and marginalization and historical roots, but I just want to also finally give the floor to journalists in the room because we're here today to ensure that Sudan should remain as a ticker. It should remain front page news, honestly, but at the very least, we want to hear from journalists. So.
While we're taking the microphone to the journalists, while this is happening, I just want to tell you something. I've been actually asked to go and speak on CTV. I'll just name it. Right after the Al-Fashir, and it got delayed twice and 3 times. Well, this is literally days after the massacre, with thousands of people massacred within the 2 days, because the NHL finals were, and it was literally an open thing that was mentioned. Now I'm telling you, you have and I still went because I needed to do it anyways. But this is the feeling that Sudanese people are feeling, because again, this is what we're sharing, and we're talking to people. We have to go and mention this, but no, we don't have space because it's just not that kind of a story.
Speaking, I guess, at least for one journalist, I'm Nathaniel Dove from Global News. Thank you for having me and speaking to all of us. I have a question, I guess, for the General and Mr. Ray, but I'd love to hear from everyone. You spoke about Canadian politics being, focused on the short term and saying that you need to make the case to Canadians that this conflict, this horrible conflict in Sudan is in the Canadian interest. How do you bridge that gap? How do you tell Canadians, how do you convince them that this is in the Canadians' interest? Thank you.
Africa is the breadbasket of humanity. And when we give it the capacity to be able to manage it and to be able to exploit it massively, the rest of the world is going to turn to it to be fed. So Africa as a continent is no more the source of other people using for their good. It is a player in the stability of humanity as Europe and the big three that are right now going at each other. And of course, the other parts of the world. But where I'm getting at is that we've got to rekindle a communion with Africa, with the African Union, with the sub-regions, the 5 sub-regions. The sub-region is doing nothing to help Sudan. Yet I have people in Mozambique coming from Rwanda that's not even in that sub-region to try to stabilize that. Madagascar, the Zeds are taking it over. Northern Nigeria, I've got people there. And they're using child soldiers and girls for war. There is enormous amount of incredible effort that we could do by making Africa a full-fledged part of the advancement of humanity and not a source that we use when we want to and abuse when we want to. And that the Africans also use their structures, and we try to reinforce that. And a country like ours can, in fact, be a leading middle power. We can be a leading middle power and not take our eyes off of Europe, not take our eyes off the Americans making massive modernization of more nuclear weapons than there were during the Cold War, which are totally useless weapons to start with. We can do that, but we can also engage in finally getting Canada to write an African policy, more than just a few lines in there, and to fund it and to engage in it. But only using Sudan won't sell the product, because not all humans are human. Some of them are less human.
Yeah, Nizreen, really quick, I think we can also continue at the reception, but I want to make time for any remaining journalist questions. Yes, Nizreen.
I just want to add to that, though, that I also think that Africa needs to stop being the breadbasket and the sort of resource bowl for the world, right? Since 1884, the way that, colonial powers divided up, it's been a source. And part of the reason, I think, there are so many external actors involved, to the question earlier. You also have Egypt and Iran and Ukraine on the other side, livestock, the trade of gum arabic. 80% of the world's gum arabic is produced in Sudan. It's the one product that has not been under sanctions, and it gets funneled out of Sudan through neighboring countries like Kenya, and then brought to countries like the UAE, where the 1 unit of gum arabic, when it leaves Sudan, is worth $500. By the time it gets to the UAE, it's worth $5,000, right? And so we have to keep that in mind. I think, to me, what really needs to happen is we need to stop the negative forms of intervention that are happening in Sudan, that have been happening over the decades, and to also acknowledge the role that Canada has played in that, which then means that we need to hold ourselves accountable, right? And to not reproduce the policies, like in terms of investments in land. The UAE's investments in land have been very detrimental in Sudan, because they've dispossessed small herders, and farmers of their land, who then become the most willing recruits for the military state, for the RSF, for the SAF, right? And so really, I think what needs to be happening is we need to focus on allowing people to become self-sufficient, to grow their own land, to stay on their own land. For Darfurians who have been displaced 20 years ago, to be able to return to their land and to grow their own food, so that they're not relying on food aid for decades, right? So all of these things, I think we do need to keep that in mind, even in the ways that we envision a future role for Canada. And so I'll just end by saying, I think, again, like in Haiti, like in the Congo, right, where we've seen a 29-year plunder of the Congo because of the ways that the Silicon Valley has benefited from it, we need to really rethink our role, right, as people in the kind of resource plunder of the African continent.
Thank you so much. Rania, do we have time for one more? I mean, I also want to make sure we're ending on time to break the fast.
Thank you so much to the panelists and to the attendees. So I'm Rania, I'm part of the SCCA, which is the Sudanese Canadian Communities Association. And I think what I want to say is, for 3 years since the war, we feel like, as the Sudanese Canadian community, we've been walking this path alone. We've been fighting the fight of trying to get help in terms of humanitarian assistance, in terms of creating policies of immigration that helps bring our families and loved ones to safety fast, of trying to do something and pay to get everyone or someone to pay attention to what's happening in Sudan alone. And that is hard. It's been hard. And just to see this room, I think what I'm asking for before we conclude is that you talk to us, that you engage with us, and that you help us. And we do have friends that stood up really for us in this room, and we're very grateful for, like when no one did, because if you look from an interest and what's in it for you, there is not much for a lot of people in being engaged in Sudan, and what can be done for the Sudanese community here that is like really suffering and really traumatized, but also in helping us. We do have courage, we do have initiative, and we can help set the breadcrumb path that was talked about that goes the right way, but we cannot walk this path alone. We need help. So please engage with us and help us. Thank you.
All right, I guess if we don't have any more questions, we can, yeah. We're short on time. We're short on time. Yeah. All right, we're going to move on to closing remarks, and I think it's really important, though, to close on Rania's point in engaging with the Sudanese community and getting informed about how Canadian policies are falling far too short to respond. And I think actually the immigration numbers are actually even greater, where 2,400 people arrived from Sudan, according to IRCC, and in just 2 years after the war in Ukraine broke out, Canada welcomed 300,000 Ukrainians. This simply can't be a question of capacity, so this needs to be a priority for the government as well. And thank you so much to all our panelists. Introducing my colleague Mutessem Ali to close us and bring us home. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Wow, what an incredible panel and very insightful conversation. I think we are way behind the schedule, and so I'm gonna really cut short. What I will try to do now is to introduce Professor Cotler, because we have a video ready. If we can roll that, it will be.
I'm pleased to join this timely, indeed urgent webinar in partnership with James Orbinski and Massey College, along with their distinguished faculty, Payam Akakvan, General Dallaire, Bob Ray, and with the witness testimony of Sudanese assembled here, to sound the alarm on the second genocide in Sudan of the 21st century. A genocide foretold, forewarned, yet forsaken and forgotten, underpinned by indifference, inaction, and an ongoing culture of impunity. I say this because as an MP in 2003, I organized the first Save Darfur all-parliamentary coalition, re the first genocide in Sudan. In 2004, as Minister of Justice and Attorney General, I addressed the Stockholm Conference on Genocide and warned then of the genocide in Sudan, followed by the determination by the Canadian government in that respect. And in 2005, under the leadership of Prime Minister Paul Martin, we sought and helped secure the adoption by the UN General Assembly of the responsibility to protect doctrine. Accordingly, it is for me today particularly tragic and painful that 23 years later, we meet again for a genocide foretold and forgotten, amidst, as I said, an ongoing conspiracy of silence, crimes of indifference, pervasive impunity. Moreover, this second genocide is even more horrific than the first. 4 times as many Sudanese have been murdered. Sudan is the seat of the greatest humanitarian catastrophe in the world today, of unimaginable suffering, something that cannot be captured by statistics, unimaginable daily suffering as we meet, where the suffering of the Sudanese people was documented by Mutassim Ali, himself a survivor of the first Darfurian genocide, and Yona Diamond, both legal advisors to the Raoul Wallenberg Centre, documented the genocide and the warning of it 2 years ago. And 6 months ago, documented the horrific massacre of children in Al-Fashir. Nobody can say that we did not know. We knew, but we did not act. And today, we know, and still we are not acting. And while it is imperative to sound the alarm bells are not enough. What is needed now is necessary action. Action by Canada in concert with the international community. As I've said many times before, and it is particularly pertinent now, at times such as these, qui s'excuse, s'accuse. Whoever remains indifferent indicts himself and herself. And so while it is important and necessary for this wake-up call, what is imperative is for the necessary action to follow, for the necessary leadership of Canada in concert with the international community to put an end to this horrific suffering of the Sudanese people, and to do so not only on behalf of the Sudanese people, though that certainly is that which must impel us, but to do so also on behalf of our common humanity. Thank you.
Prof. Wow. Okay, so I think now I would like to welcome Honorable Al-Khouri, who's already being introduced as the chair of Subcommittee on International Human Rights, but he's also known for his relentless work in supporting refugees and new immigrants. Honorable Al-Khouri, please welcome. Thank you.
Thank you all. It's an honor to be here, Massey College, Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights, for a great cause. I would like to seize this opportunity to mention the presence of, I don't know, probably he left, my colleague, Samir Zubairi, great ambassador, Ambassador Ray, General Romeo, non, je dois vous adresser deux mots en français. Vous êtes un grand parleur, mais un grand faiseur. Si on prend en considération les outils que vous aviez pour travailler, merci pour votre service. Distinguished guest, I want to thank all of you for your very important remarks and our precious discussion. It sheds light and hope in my heart. Ma'moon and Madame, I believe in what you said, it touched me profoundly, and I was resisting even my tears, because in my life experience in my mother country, I lived such experience. I saw villages burned, cousin and friend killed, just because of their name or religions. And that was the reason I decided to leave Canada and to come to this great country, a country of welcoming, of opportunity, gave me chance to be an engineer, graduated from university here, and now become a member of parliament. That's why Canada is great, and Canada is the best. Thank you, Canada, and thank you all Canadians. As you all know, human rights are fundamental to each one of us. Why? Simply because we are humans and they are human. That is why, in an ideal world, they should apply to every single human being, regardless of nationality, religion, race, gender, or social status. As a Canadian of Lebanese origin, I have some keys to understand the Sudanese people and what they are going through in terms of instability and human rights abuse. Since the Second World War, human rights have provided a framework for laws and institutions that protect citizens from abuse of power, promoting justice and accountability that ensure that every individual is treated with respect and equality.
They create a world in which human beings are free to practice their religion, receive a decent education, and live without fear of violence and discrimination. But there are questions that remain almost impossible to answer. Do human rights help create democratic societies, or is it democratic society that help nurture human rights? The case of Sudan illustrated the tension. I had the privilege to reflect upon those questions and the problems in my role as a chair of subcommittee on international human rights for the House of Commons in Canada. Unfortunately, the war in Sudan is probably the most ignored conflict in the world has seen for a while. As you all highlighted, the ongoing conflict has created a serious humanitarian crisis. Many civilians have been forced to leave their homes. Families are struggling to find food and clean water and medical service, and access to health care and education has become extremely limited and even rare. After a couple of months, Canada even launched a limited family reunification program for Sudanese Canadians, an imperfect measure, but a necessary one nonetheless. Here I would like to comment on what you said, Mr. Ma'moon, regarding the difference, how we treated Afghani and how we are going to treat Sudani. I was a member of the immigration committee created only for Afghan. In Afghan, we helped the family that members of their families were helping the Canadian soldiers, and we had a good collaboration from Pakistan and Qatar. That's why biometric and other, it was very easy. But let's be sure and assure that to bring people here after what's going in the world from terrorist action, a protection Canadian is a priority for the government of Canada. If it is liberal or conservative or any, we have to protect, and to protect Canadian, we have to follow the rule. Since our first subcommittee meeting on October 28, 2025, we have heard many key testimonies from experts and Sudanese people directly impacted by the conflict. The subcommittee heard that the pursuit of economic and territorial control is a central driver of atrocity in Sudan. Witnesses explained that sexual and gender-based violence in Sudan is not simply a byproduct of the conflict, but is deliberately employed to destroy communities and displace population. As a father of 3 daughters and 2 granddaughters, this broke my heart, and I have to do everything possible in my means as a chair of the subcommittee of human rights to address the situation in the right way possible. You could count on me. Some witnesses identified acts seeming to amount to crime against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and on some occasion, genocide. Witnesses agreed that the resolution of Sudan's war must be predicted on a civilian democracy, impressing upon the subcommittee that Sudanese civil society is robust, even known as one of the region's strongest civil societies in the contemporary period. Many emphasized having an inclusive peace process supported by Canada, and that would need to go beyond the warring parties. In one thing is certain, it is that action must be taken that empowers Sudanese civil society, includes the voice of Sudani women in a peace process. That is very important to me as a chair for that subcommittee. That a just end to the conflict is one that pursues justice and accountability for perpetrators of a human rights violation and support the transition to a civilian democracy. Our subcommittee should publish our report and finding later in the spring. I hope it does justice to all the people in Sudan and to Sudanese Canadian. I also hope it will clear a pathway for medium powers like Canada in search of a moral guide in acting on an international scene increasingly devoid of constructive leadership. Canada will always support the humanitarian efforts and promote tolerance, dignity, justice, and the consolidation of democratic society. In all the regrouping here to discuss international human rights and the situation in Sudan, we are reminded that despite our differences, we all share the same basic needs for freedom, safety, and dignity. We have all done something that authoritarian states fear: speak and exchange views based on fact, knowledge, and a shared factuality. That is where the fight for increased human rights starts, when we try understanding each other and face the same direction in working together to fix an injustice. And I would like to conclude by saying the following: our duty to do our best to make sure that the power of law prevail and never the law of power. Thank you, and great to be with you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Hori, for your powerful remarks. And we have been engaging for a while to draw attention to the crisis in Sudan. That is part of the reason why we testified last year. And that is part of the reason why we also have the all-party caucus for Sudan. We are also engaging with the executive branch at all levels, especially with the sanctions unit. We do, recognize the important work done by the Canadian government. The reason why we're convening here is the belief that there is an opportunity for Canada to do more. And I think on that we all agree. I think before I turn the baton to Payam to conclude this, I just want to say a quick things. Sort of shifting my remarks a little bit. We heard a lot about the atrocities that have been committed and still happening as we speak today, especially in North Darfur. And these atrocities are happening because the RSF is deploying advanced weaponry and technologies to besiege communities, destroy homes, agricultural lands, as Yona mentioned earlier today, and carry out mass killings, rape, and extreme sexual violence. These are crimes that we have all witnessed. But acknowledging this does not absolve the Sudanese armed forces from the atrocity that they too commit, right? They're involved in war crimes, crimes against humanity, even complicity in genocide, as we documented in our 2024 report. These crimes are serious enough to warrant international intervention to protect civilians. But the scale, intent, and the systematic nature of the RSF atrocities are something that I have not seen before. And let me be clear. The Sudanese families, many of us, we do not see this as a good and evil thing. We do not see the RSF as an evil and SAF as a good. It is a war on civilians in which all armed actors, right, the allied militias with the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces, behaved as though Sudanese civilian lives carry no value. This is what we have documented throughout the conflict. Now, the advanced technologies, and we spoke earlier about the external actors, drones, to target civilians, were not made in Sudan. Sudan does not have the capacity to manufacture these technologies. They came from somewhere. Someone somehow supplied them. That means external actors are complicit
in the killing of Masalit, Zagawa, Fur, Berti, non-Arab communities, and Sudanese across the country. And instead of examining, this is the hardest truth, instead of examining the enablers of genocide, investigators and civil society groups are the ones placed under the scrutiny. Let me be specific. We can confidently say that Russia, the Wagner Group, Egypt, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar are backing the Sudanese armed forces. Yet many remain hesitant to call out the UAE, despite extensive evidence by the UN panel of experts, independent investigators, and US intelligence community. The volume of evidence implicating the RSF far exceeds the evidence that we have of external actors backing the Sudanese armed forces. And instead, somehow, the UAE continues to evade accountability. What strikes me the most, that every time new evidence emerges of RSF atrocities, we suddenly hear renewed warnings about the threat of Muslim Brotherhood. This is something that we continue to hear almost every day, as if the Muslim Brotherhood was created 3 years ago. It is an argument with historical roots, yes, but one now used to deflect attention from the crimes of the RSF as principal external backer, the UAE. We are told that by speaking out, we're echoing Islamist propaganda. Some of us have lost entire families. In a single night, friends, classmates, whole communities erased, and yet our grief is dismissed as propaganda, attacking credibility of victims and investigators, deflecting to unrelated political manipulation, political narratives, normalizing or justifying violence through historical manipulation. These are familiar tactics. We've seen this before, used by perpetrators to force victims onto defensive and to turn the accused onto accusers. These are not merely the seeds from which atrocities sprout. They are the harrowing culmination and the devastating final stage of genocide. Despite this, I remain hopeful. For hope is a moral choice. It is the foundation of every movement that has ever been the arc of history toward justice. This lesson I learned from Professor Cotler. He believes that our greatest source of hope lies in a simple truth, that every injustice can be confronted, and that every right can be reclaimed. When people choose courage over indifference, as he just elaborated, optimism, he reminds us, is not a prediction, it is a principle. The arc of justice does not bend on its own. It bends only when we place our hands on it. Today's gathering is a proof that voices of courage and clarity matter. We have heard from some of the brightest minds on the issue. Together, we have sharpened the conversation on Sudan accountability and justice. And we have refused to look away from the crisis in Sudan. A crisis the world has too often allowed to fade into the background. On behalf of the organizers, I thank you for your presence, your solidarity, and your commitment to justice. Let today not be another moment of reflection without action. Let it be a turning point, a reminder that Sudanese lives are not expendable, and that the responsibility to protect must be more than a slogan. To our speakers, thank you for your insight, your integrity, and your commitment. It is an honor to have you with us. And to all of you, the attendees. Just a few reminders, and Payam will turn it over to you. We have two requests for everyone. One is that our team will soon send a very short post-event survey to each of you. Please take a look at that, fill it out. We read every comment submitted, and we really value your input and ideas. We are committed to offering solutions-oriented discussions, amplify our messages. A video recording will be distributed as well. And then final announcement, we will have a round table on Sudan on April 17th. We will send an email with details. Please stay tuned. And with that, I'll turn it over to Payam. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I will be very brief after what has been a very intense, one could say, emotionally exhausting few hours. I just want to thank once again Massey College and the Wallenberg Centre for taking this initiative. But I do want to say to our Sudanese sister, who I think may have left the room, who was talking about what is in our interest to be here. There we go. Well, thank you. Well, we are here because of what Professor Cotler referred to as our shared humanity. And if I may say, coming from Iranian origin, there is a poem of Saadi from Shiraz, which is etched in one of the meeting rooms of the UN General Assembly, which says, human beings are members of a whole, created in essence of one soul. So we're here in solidarity because of our shared humanity. But I do want to end by saying this. The purpose of this meeting was not performative politics. It was not virtue signaling. And Yona Diamond and Mutassim Ali, my brothers, who are really the initiators of this event, are going to produce an outcome document with specific action points. And we ask our very distinguished members of parliaments, members of the media, all those who are in a position to do something, to please consider the points of action that we will put in that document. And with that, I thank all of you for showing up today, and you are now welcome to join the reception. Thank you.